The ballroom fell silent the moment Victor Ashbourne crossed the threshold. Not because of his title, though Duke carried weight enough to crush lesser men. No, it was the way he moved through the crowd like winter itself, eyes fixed on one woman. Lydia Hartwell stood frozen near the terrace doors, her plain governess dress a stark contrast to the silk and jewels surrounding her. She knew what was coming. Everyone knew. The whispers had already started, vicious and eager, ready to tear her apart. And Victor was about to make everything so much worse. Before we begin Lydia's impossible journey from ruin to power, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Lydia remembered that detail with peculiar clarity later, when everything else had blurred into a nightmare of accusatory stares and slammed doors. Tuesday. The day Mrs. Pemberton's youngest had finally mastered her French conjugations. The day the cook had burned the morning scones. The day Lydia's entire life had collapsed. She'd been in the nursery when the housekeeper brought it up, her face pinched with something that might have been pity or might have been satisfaction. With Mrs. Dalworth, it was always hard to tell. For you, Miss Hartwell. The woman had set the envelope on the writing desk as if it might burn her fingers. Though I can't imagine who'd be writing to a governess. The seal was unmarked. No family crest. No return address. Just expensive paper and black wax. Lydia should have known then. She'd dismissed the children to their afternoon rest and opened it alone, standing by the window where the autumn light fell in weak, watery strips across the floor. The handwriting inside was masculine, precise, entirely unfamiliar. Miss Hartwell, we must speak, tonight. The garden gate at 10 o'clock. Do not refuse me. V.A. No signature, just initials that meant nothing to her. But the paper. That paper was too fine for a tradesman, too elegant for anyone in her limited social sphere. She should have thrown it away, should have reported it to Lord Pemberton immediately. Instead, she'd folded it carefully and tucked it into her sleeve, where it burned against her wrist like a brand for the rest of the day. Miss Hartwell, you're distracted. Little Caroline Pemberton stared up at her with wide, knowing eyes, 8 years old and already too clever by half. I'm perfectly attentive, Caroline. Continue your recitation. You checked the window 4 times during my scales. Are you expecting someone? Don't be impertinent. But Caroline was right. Lydia had checked the window, had wondered, with increasing anxiety, who VA might be and what they could possibly want with her. A governess had no business receiving mysterious letters, had no business meeting strange men in gardens at night. She went anyway. Looking back, she could see how thoroughly she'd sealed her own fate with that single decision, how completely she'd underestimated the cruelty of the world she inhabited. But standing in her small room that evening, watching the clock tick toward 10, Lydia had only felt a peculiar mixture of fear and defiance. 26 years old, plain-faced, unremarkable. She'd spent her entire adult life being invisible, moving through the houses of the wealthy like a shadow, necessary but unnoticed. And now someone had written to her, had demanded her attention. It was foolish, dangerous. She went. The garden gate creaked when she opened it, loud enough to make her wince. The Pemberton estate sprawled in darkness behind her, most of the windows already dark. The family had retired early. Lord Pemberton's gout was troubling him again. No one would miss her for an hour, maybe 2. You came. The voice came from her left, near the old oak tree, deep, cultured, absolutely certain of itself. Lydia turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. I don't make a habit of meeting strangers in the dark. You should state your business quickly, sir, before I lose my nerve entirely. A figure detached from the shadows, and Lydia's breath caught. She knew him. Of course she knew him. Everyone in London knew Victor Ashbourne, even if they'd never been formally introduced. The Duke of Ashbourne. War hero. Widower. A man whose reputation preceded him like a storm front, cold, controlled, utterly without mercy. He was taller than she'd expected. The society papers always mentioned his height, but seeing him in person, silhouetted against the night sky, was different, overwhelming. Miss Hartwell. He inclined his head, a gesture that somehow managed to be both courteous and dismissive. Thank you for coming. I'm not sure I had much choice, Your Grace. Your letter was rather emphatic. Direct. I prefer direct. He stepped closer, and Lydia fought the urge to retreat. His face was all sharp angles in the moonlight, handsome in the same way a blade might be handsome, dangerous and precise. We have a problem. We have a problem? I don't believe we've ever spoken before tonight. No, but we've been seen together. Lydia blinked. That's impossible. I've never... Last month, the Haversham ball, you were chaperoning the Pemberton girls. She remembered. Lord Pemberton had insisted the older children attend, had required Lydia to accompany them to ensure propriety. She'd spent the entire evening in the corner, trying to be invisible while keeping Caroline and Margaret from causing scandal. I didn't speak to you, Lydia said slowly. I barely saw you. You didn't need to speak to me. Someone saw us in the same room and decided to create a story. Victor's voice was flat, matter-of-fact, but his jaw was tight. Apparently, I sought you out specifically. Apparently, we had a lengthy conversation in the alcove near the refreshments. Apparently, we've been conducting a clandestine affair for weeks. The words hit her like cold water. That's insane. I would never. Of course you wouldn't. But facts are irrelevant when gossip is more entertaining. Lydia's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, hard, trying to think through the panic rising in her throat. Who started this rumor? Does it matter? It's spreading. By tomorrow, it will be common knowledge. By the end of the week, you'll be dismissed. He said it so calmly, as if he were discussing the weather instead of her entire future crumbling to dust. This isn't fair. The words came out strangled, furious. I've done nothing wrong, nothing. No, you haven't. For the first time, something that might have been sympathy flickered across his face. But fairness has nothing to do with it. You're a governess who was in the same room as me. That's enough. Lydia wanted to scream, wanted to rage at the injustice of it, at the casual cruelty of a society that would destroy her for existing in proximity to the wrong man, but she'd learned long ago that anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. Why are you telling me this? She asked instead. If the damage is already done, why seek me out? Because I have a solution. Something in his tone made her stomach drop. What kind of solution? Marriage. The word hung between them like a sword. Lydia stared at him, blinked, stared again. You can't be serious. I'm always serious, Miss Hartwell. You're suggesting because of a rumor, you want to marry me? One is irrelevant. It's the logical solution to our mutual problem. He spoke like he was outlining a business arrangement. Perhaps to him, he was. The scandal damages us both. You lose your position, your reputation, any chance of future employment. I appear weak, careless. A man who dallies with employees and ruins innocent women. So you'd rather actually marry me? That seems rather extreme. Less extreme than the alternative. His eyes were cold, calculating. If we marry, the narrative shifts. We become a love story instead of a scandal. Unconventional, perhaps, but ultimately romantic. The papers will eat it up. The papers will crucify me, Lydia said flatly. A governess marrying a duke? They'll say I trapped you, manipulated you. They'll make me into a villain. Perhaps, but you'll be a villain with a title and my protection. That's more than you'll have otherwise. The brutal honesty of it was almost refreshing. At least he wasn't pretending this was about anything other than strategy. Lydia forced herself to breathe, to think. What do you get out of this? Control of the narrative, an end to speculation about my personal life, and he hesitated, the first crack in his armor. My daughter needs stability. A mother figure. You come with excellent references as a governess. Ah, there it was. The real reason. You're looking for someone to raise your child. I'm looking for someone competent, discreet, someone who understands what this arrangement actually is. His gaze held hers, unwavering. I won't pretend to offer you love, Miss Hartwell. I can't. But I can offer you security, a position, a future that doesn't end in poverty. It was, objectively, a terrible offer. A marriage with no affection, no warmth, no promise of anything except survival. But Lydia had spent 6 years watching women like her disappear into nothing when their positions ended, had watched them fade into workhouses, into desperate marriages with cruel men, into graves marked only with numbers. This was survival, just a different kind. I need time to think. You have until morning. After that, the scandal will be too widespread to control. He pulled something from his pocket, a calling card. Send word to this address. Say yes or no. Nothing else required. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Miss Hartwell, I am sorry. You didn't deserve to be caught in this. Then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness like he'd never been there at all. Lydia stood alone in the garden, clutching the calling card hard enough to crease the expensive paper, and tried to decide if she was brave enough or desperate enough to say yes. By morning, the decision was made for her. She came down to breakfast to find the entire household in chaos. Mrs. Dalworth stood in the entrance hall, her face mottled with righteous fury, waving a newspaper like a weapon. Disgraceful! Absolutely disgraceful! Lord Pemberton emerged from his study, his face grave. When he saw Lydia on the stairs, he sighed. Miss Hartwell, my study. Now. The newspaper was already spread across his desk. Lydia didn't need to read it to know what it said. She could see the headline from where she stood. Duke's secret romance with household staff? Beneath it, a drawing that was clearly meant to be her, locked in an embrace with a man who could only be Victor Ashbourne. I want you to know, Lord Pemberton said heavily, that I don't believe a word of this nonsense. You've been nothing but professional during your time here. But you're going to dismiss me anyway. I have daughters, Miss Hartwell. I can't have this kind of scandal attached to our household. Surely you understand. She did. Of course she did. That was the worst part. She couldn't even blame him. I'll pack my things. You have until noon. I'll provide a reference, of course. Discreetly worded, but it should help. It won't. Lydia's voice was surprisingly steady. No one will hire a governess involved in a scandal with the Duke of Ashbourne. We both know that. He had the grace to look ashamed, but he didn't argue. Lydia climbed the stairs to her small room and sat on the narrow bed, staring at the walls that had been her home for 3 years. She had £50 saved, maybe 60 if she sold her mother's brooch. Enough for a few months' rent in a cheap boarding house. Then what? Factory work, if she was lucky. The streets, if she wasn't. The calling card was still in her pocket. She pulled it out, smoothed the creases, and stared at the address printed in elegant script. Ashbourne House, Mayfair. Pride whispered that she should refuse, that accepting would be admitting defeat, surrendering her dignity for security. But Lydia had learned long ago that pride was another luxury she couldn't afford. Dignity didn't keep you fed. Principles didn't keep you off the streets. She found paper and pen and wrote 2 words, I accept. Buck. The wedding took place 3 days later in a private chapel with no guests, except Victor's lawyer and a bored-looking clergyman who barely glanced at her before beginning the ceremony. Lydia wore her best dress, gray wool, high-necked, entirely practical, and carried no flowers. There was no music, no celebration. Victor stood beside her in formal black, his expression unreadable as he repeated vows that clearly meant nothing to him. When the clergyman pronounced them married, he didn't kiss her, didn't even smile. That's done then. He turned to his lawyer. Have the announcement sent to the papers, exactly as we discussed. Of course, Your Grace. And the new Duchess's belongings? Send a cart to the Pemberton estate. Have everything brought to Ashbourne House by tonight. He glanced at Lydia. Unless there's anything you need to collect personally. No, I don't have much. Fine. He was already moving toward the door, clearly ready to be done with the entire affair. The carriage will take you to Ashbourne House. Mrs. Brennan will show you your rooms. You're not coming? He paused, one hand on the doorframe. I have business in the city. I'll return this evening. Then he was gone, leaving Lydia standing alone in the chapel with a ring on her finger and a title she didn't want. Duchess. She was a duchess. The thought should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt like a noose tightening around her throat. Ashbourne House was a monument to cold elegance. All marble floors and soaring ceilings and windows that let in light, but no warmth. The staff lined up to greet her in the entrance hall, their faces carefully blank as the housekeeper made introductions. Your Grace, may I present the household staff? This is Mrs. Brennan, the head housekeeper. Mr. Collins, the butler. Mary and Susan, the upstairs maids. Lydia tried to pay attention, tried to remember names and faces, but they all blurred together. She could feel their judgment like ice against her skin, could practically hear their thoughts. Governess, upstart, gold digger. Mrs. Brennan will show you to your quarters, the butler said stiffly. Dinner is served at 8. His Grace prefers punctuality. The rooms were beautiful. Lydia would give them that much. A bedroom larger than her entire previous lodging, decorated in cream and gold. A sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. A dressing room already stocked with gowns she hadn't asked for and definitely couldn't afford. His Grace took the liberty of ordering your wardrobe, Mrs. Brennan said, her tone suggesting this was somehow scandalous. You'll find everything you need. If there's anything missing, inform Mary. This is generous. His Grace is always generous. The housekeeper's smile didn't reach her eyes. To those who deserve it. The barb was clear enough. Lydia let it pass. She'd dealt with worse from people in less powerful positions. Where is the nursery? I'd like to meet the Duke's daughter. Something flickered across Mrs. Brennan's face. Lady Eleanor is in the East Wing, but His Grace left specific instructions that you're not to disturb her today. She's had a difficult week. I'm not planning to disturb her. I'd just like to introduce myself. His Grace was very clear, Your Grace. The emphasis on the title was just shy of mocking. Tomorrow will be soon enough. It was a dismissal, a deliberate power play from a servant who clearly had no intention of accepting Lydia's authority. But fighting it now, on her first day, would only make things worse. Fine. Tomorrow, then. She spent the rest of the afternoon alone in her rooms, trying on dresses she didn't choose, and staring at walls that would never feel like home. When the dinner bell rang, she made her way to the formal dining room and found a table set for one. Victor didn't come home that evening, or the next, or the next. The message was clear. The marriage might be official, but she was still utterly alone. Waltz. It was on the 4th day that Lydia finally met Eleanor. She'd been exploring the house, trying to map out her new prison, when she heard crying coming from behind a closed door in the East Wing. Not the wailing of a tantrum, but the quiet, desperate sobbing of a child trying very hard not to be heard. Lydia knocked softly. Hello? Are you all right in there? The crying stopped immediately. I'm not supposed to talk to you, a small voice said. Mrs. Brennan said so. Mrs. Brennan isn't here right now, and I'm not asking you to talk. I'm just asking if you're hurt. Silence. Then, no. Good. That's good. Lydia leaned against the door frame, speaking to the wood rather than demanding entry. My name is Lydia. I'm your father's, well, I suppose I'm your stepmother now. Though that's a rather grim word, isn't it? Makes me sound like I should be forcing you to scrub floors or something. A small, wet laugh from behind the door. I promise I have no interest in making you scrub floors, Lydia continued. I'm actually quite terrible at giving orders. I used to be a governess, which meant I spent most of my time trying to convince children to do things they didn't want to do. It's exhausting. I much prefer just talking. More silence. Then, slowly, the door cracked open. Eleanor Ashbourne was 7 years old, pale and thin, with her father's dark hair and eyes that had seen too much sadness for someone so young. She stared at Lydia with obvious suspicion. You don't look like a duchess. Lydia smiled. What should a duchess look like? Beautiful, like in the paintings. You just look normal. Is that bad? Eleanor considered this. I don't know yet. Fair enough. Lydia crouched down to the girl's level, making herself smaller, less threatening. I heard you crying. Do you want to talk about it? I miss my mother. The words were simple, direct, devastating. I'm sorry, Lydia said quietly. I know that doesn't help, but I'm truly, truly sorry. Everyone says it gets easier. It doesn't. No, it doesn't. It just becomes different. The sharp edges wear down a bit, but the shape of it stays with you. She knew this personally. Her own mother had died when she was 12. The grief had never left. She just learned to carry it better. Eleanor studied her with those two old eyes. Did your mother die too? Yes, a long time ago. Do you still think about her? Every day. Something in the girl's expression softened. Not trust exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. Mrs. Brennan says you're only here because you tricked my father into marrying you. There it was, the poison already spreading. Lydia sat back on her heels, choosing her words carefully. I didn't trick anyone. But I won't lie to you, Eleanor. This marriage, it's complicated. Your father and I don't love each other. We barely know each other. But that doesn't mean I'm here to hurt you or to replace your mother. I couldn't if I tried. Then why are you here? Honestly? Because the alternative was worse, and because I was told you needed someone. If that someone can't be me, I understand, but I'd like to try. Eleanor's lip trembled. Everyone tries, then they leave. I'm not everyone. It was a promise Lydia had no right to make, but looking at this small, broken child, she made it anyway. They sat together in the doorway for a long time, not speaking, just existing in the same space. When Eleanor finally retreated back into her room, Lydia didn't push, but the door stayed cracked open. It was something. Victor returned that evening, appearing in the drawing room where Lydia was attempting to read. He still wore his coat, snow dusting his shoulders. When had it started snowing? And looked exhausted. We need to talk, he said without preamble. Lydia set down her book. About? You met Eleanor. I heard her crying. I introduced myself, that's all. Mrs. Brennan said you were questioning her. Mrs. Brennan has been trying to undermine me since I arrived, Lydia said evenly. If she told you I was questioning Eleanor, she lied. We spoke for perhaps 10 minutes, mostly about her mother. Victor's jaw tightened. Her mother is not a topic for casual conversation. Neither is grief. But sometimes children need to talk about it anyway. You've been here less than a week. You don't know what she needs. Lydia stood, anger finally overriding caution. And you do? When was the last time you had an actual conversation with your daughter, Your Grace? Because from what I can see, you've been hiding from her as thoroughly as you've been hiding from me. His eyes went cold, dangerous. You forget yourself. Do I? You brought me here to be a mother to that child. Well, mothering requires presence, attention. It requires actually showing up instead of disappearing for days at a time. I have responsibilities. So do I. And right now, one of them is pointing out that your daughter is suffering and you're too busy maintaining your reputation to notice. The silence that followed was arctic. You're right, Victor said finally, his voice tight. About Eleanor. Not about my reasons for being absent, but about the result. She deserves better. It was the first genuinely human thing Lydia had heard him say. She told me Mrs. Brennan has been poisoning her against me, Lydia continued, softer now, telling her I'm an interloper, a gold digger. If this arrangement is going to work, if Eleanor is going to accept me, I need your support, or at least your staff's obedience. Victor nodded slowly. I'll speak to Mrs. Brennan. Thank you. He turned to leave, then hesitated. For what it's worth, Eleanor hasn't spoken about her mother to anyone in over a year. If she spoke to you about it, that means something. It wasn't much, but it was acknowledgement, recognition that maybe, possibly, Lydia wasn't completely useless in this role she'd been forced into. After he left, she returned to her book but couldn't focus on the words. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the gardens in white. Beautiful and cold, just like everything else in this house. The announcement of their marriage hit the papers the next morning, and the reaction was exactly as Lydia had predicted. The scandal sheets gleefully tore her apart. Governess, social climber, manipulator. The more respectable papers were marginally kinder, but equally skeptical. Even the ones that tried to frame it as a romance couldn't hide their doubt. Invitations that had previously flooded Ashbourne House dried up overnight. The few that did arrive came with thinly veiled insults and cutting remarks about how progressive the Duke was being. They'll come around, Victor said when Lydia mentioned it over breakfast. the first meal they'd shared since the wedding. Or they won't. Either way, it doesn't matter. It matters to Eleanor. She's already isolated. This will make it worse. Eleanor doesn't attend society functions. She will eventually, and when she does, she'll carry the stain of my reputation. Lydia set down her teacup carefully. We should host something. A dinner party? Show a united front. Victor looked at her like she'd suggested they set the house on fire. Absolutely not. Why not? Because putting you in front of that crowd right now would be feeding you to wolves. They'd tear you apart for entertainment. They're already tearing me apart. At least this way I'd have a chance to defend myself. There is no defending against society, Lydia. You either have their approval or you don't. Right now you don't. Forcing the issue will only make it worse. It was the first time he'd used her given name. She wasn't sure if that was progress or just familiarity bred by frustration. So your plan is to hide me away? Keep me locked in this house like I'm something shameful? My plan is to protect you from your own naivety. He stood, clearly done with the conversation. Give it time. The scandal will fade. Something else will catch their attention. Then perhaps we can venture into public together. And in the meantime, you focus on Eleanor. That's why you're here. He left before she could argue further. Lydia sat alone at the breakfast table, staring at the remains of eggs and toast she couldn't bring herself to eat, and wondered if she'd traded one kind of invisibility for another. Days blurred into weeks. Lydia settled into a strange sort of routine, mornings with Eleanor, teaching her mathematics and literature and history, afternoons in the library reading books from Victor's extensive collection, evenings alone in a room listening to the house settle around her. Victor remained a ghost. She'd see him occasionally at dinner or passing in the hallways, but he never stayed long, never lingered. Their conversations were brief, transactional. He'd ask about Eleanor's progress. She'd report. He'd nod and disappear again. The staff remained coldly polite. Mrs. Brennan followed orders. She no longer openly undermined Lydia, but her disapproval was palpable. The maids whispered. The footmen smirked. Only the cook, a practical woman named Mrs. Shaw, treated Lydia with anything approaching warmth. Don't mind them, she said one afternoon when Lydia ventured into the kitchen seeking company. They're protective of his grace. Give them time. How much time? It's been a month. His first wife, Lady Catherine. She was beloved, beautiful, charming, everything a duchess should be. Mrs. Shaw's hands were busy kneading dough, her voice matter of fact. When she died, it nearly destroyed him, the staff. They remember that. They remember how broken he was, and now here you are, a stranger wearing her title. I'm not trying to replace her. I know that, you know that, but they see a woman in Catherine's house, sleeping in Catherine's rooms, raising Catherine's daughter. It's going to take more than a month for them to accept that. Lydia watched the dough take shape under Mrs. Shaw's practiced hands. Does Victor still grieve her? Every day. The cook's expression softened. He just hides it well. That's his way. Control everything, feel nothing, but the grief is still there, festering. It explains so much. The distance, the coldness, the absolute refusal to engage with anything emotional. Victor wasn't just protecting himself. He was protecting what little remained of his heart. Lydia left the kitchens feeling something she hadn't expected. Sympathy for the man who'd turned her life upside down. The crisis, when it came, arrived in the form of Adrian Ashbourne. Victor's cousin appeared at Ashbourne House on a cold December morning, all charm and smiles and barely concealed ambition. Lydia met him in the drawing room, where he'd requested an audience. Your Grace, he bowed with exaggerated courtesy. How delightful to finally meet you properly. I'm Adrian Ashbourne, Victor's cousin, though I suppose that makes us family now, doesn't it? There was something calculated in his warmth, something false. Mr. Ashbourne, Victor didn't mention you were coming. Victor doesn't mention much, does he? Terribly secretive, my cousin. Adrian settled into a chair uninvited, crossing his legs with practiced ease. I wanted to welcome you personally to the family, and to offer my support during this difficult transition. That's very kind. Not kind, practical. His smile sharpened. I imagine being married to Victor is rather lonely. He's not exactly known for his warmth, and the staff here, well, they can be quite protective of the Ashbourne name. If you ever need an ally, someone who understands the challenges you're facing, I hope you'll consider me." It was an offer wrapped in silk, but Lydia could see the knife beneath it. Adrian was fishing, testing her loyalty, her intelligence, her potential usefulness. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I'm managing quite well on my own." "Are you?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Because from where I'm sitting, you look rather isolated. No friends, no family, married to a man who treats you like a stranger. That can't be easy." "My relationship with my husband is my own concern, Mr. Ashbourne." Of course, of course." He raised his hands in mock surrender. "I'm simply saying that alliances matter in this world, especially for someone in your unique position." "And what position is that?" "A woman with a title but no real power. A duchess in name only." His eyes glittered. "Unless, of course, you plan to change that." Before Lydia could respond, the door opened and Victor entered, his expression darkening the moment he saw Adrian. "What are you doing here?" "Visiting my dear cousin and his lovely new wife. Is that a crime? When you show up uninvited and interrogate my duchess in my own home?" "Yes." Adrian stood, adjusting his cuffs with deliberate casualness. "I was merely being friendly, though I can see my presence isn't welcome. I'll take my leave." He turned to Lydia, bowing again. "A pleasure, Your Grace. I do hope we'll speak again soon." After he left, Victor turned to Lydia, his face rigid with controlled fury. "What did he say to you?" "He offered his support and implied that our marriage is a sham. Adrian is a snake. He's been circling the title since my father died, waiting for an excuse to claim I'm unfit to hold it." Victor's hands were clenched at his sides. "Do not trust him. Do not speak to him again without me present. He's your family. He's a vulture. And you, whether you realize it or not, have just been identified as the weakest point in my armor." The words should have stung. Instead, they crystallized something Lydia had been trying to ignore for weeks. This marriage wasn't just about scandal or survival anymore. It was about power, and she'd become a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. The realization settled over Lydia like frost, slow, creeping, impossible to ignore. She wasn't just Victor's wife in name. She was ammunition, a weakness Adrian could exploit, a crack in the Duke's carefully constructed fortress. And if she didn't figure out how to become something more than that, she'd destroy everything Victor had built, whether she meant to or not. She found him in his study that evening, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence, a glass of whiskey untouched at his elbow. "We need to talk about your cousin." Victor didn't look up. "No, we don't. Adrian is my problem, not yours. He made me his problem when he walked into this house and started measuring me for weaknesses." Lydia closed the door behind her, something she'd never dared before. "What does he want? Really?" "The title, the estate, everything I have." Victor finally met her eyes, and the exhaustion there was startling. "My father's will was complicated. If I die without a legitimate heir, or if I'm deemed unfit to hold the dukedom, the title passes to Adrian. And he thinks our marriage gives him grounds to challenge your fitness?" "He thinks a lot of things. Most of them involve me being too grief-stricken, too reckless, too unstable to manage the responsibilities of the position." He picked up the whiskey, stared at it, set it down again without drinking. "Marrying you so quickly after the scandal, it plays into that narrative. So he'll use me to prove you're not thinking clearly." "Yes." The bluntness of it was almost admirable. No pretty lies, no attempts to soften the blow. Just cold, hard truth. "Then we need to prove him wrong," Lydia said, publicly. "I already told you. I know what you told me. Hide. Wait. Let the scandal fade." She moved closer to his desk, planting her hands on the polished wood. "But Adrian isn't going to wait. He's going to keep pushing, keep spreading doubt, until even your allies start questioning whether you made the right choice. We can't just defend against that. We need to attack." Victor studied her for a long moment, something that might have been interest flickering across his face. "What are you suggesting?" "The winter ball. The Hastings throw it every year, don't they? It's the first major event of the season. We weren't invited. Because they're waiting to see if we're brave enough to show up anyway. Lydia's heart was hammering, but she kept her voice steady. Society respects power, Victor. Confidence. If we hide, we look guilty. But if we walk into that ballroom together, head high, and dare them to say something to our faces, they'll tear you apart. Maybe. Or maybe they'll realize I'm not going anywhere. She straightened, forcing herself to meet his gaze without flinching. I can't keep living in this house like a ghost. If I'm going to be your Duchess, I need to actually be seen as your Duchess. That means facing them. He was quiet for so long she thought he'd refuse. Then, slowly, he nodded. Fine. But we do this my way. No improvisation, no emotional outbursts. You follow my lead exactly. I'm not a puppet. No. But you're also not equipped to handle what's coming. These people will smile to your face and destroy you behind your back. If you give them even the smallest opening, they'll use it. His eyes were hard, uncompromising. Can you do that? Can you play the role without breaking? It was a test. Lydia knew that. He was waiting for her to back down, to prove she wasn't strong enough for what he was asking. She thought of Eleanor crying behind closed doors, of Mrs. Brennan's sneers, of Adrian's calculated smile, of every person who'd ever looked at her and seen nothing worth noticing. I can do it, she said. Can you? Something that might have been respect crossed his face. We'll find out. The next morning, a footman delivered their acceptance to Hastings Manor. By afternoon, the gossip mills were churning. The Duke and his scandalous new bride would be attending the winter ball. The knives were already being sharpened. Lydia spent the next week preparing like she was going into battle, because that's exactly what this was. Mrs. Shaw snuck her information about who would be attending, what alliances mattered, which families held grudges. Eleanor, surprisingly, proved useful too, repeating conversations she'd overheard from the maids about various noble families. Lady Westbrook hates anyone prettier than her, the girl reported seriously over their morning lessons. And Lord Pemberton, your old employer, he's been telling everyone you were dismissed for improper conduct. Lydia's stomach twisted. Of course he is. Is it true? No, but the truth doesn't matter much in their world, Eleanor. Only what people choose to believe. The girl considered this, her young face solemn. Father says you're brave for going to the ball. He said that? I heard him telling Mr. Collins that you have more spine than sense. Eleanor paused. I think he meant it as a compliment. Coming from Victor, it probably was. The dress arrived 2 days before the ball, deep emerald silk that brought out the color in Lydia's eyes, cut in the latest fashion, but not so daring as to invite scandal. Victor's doing, clearly. She tried it on in her room, staring at her reflection in the mirror and barely recognizing herself. She looked like a duchess. Now she just had to act like one. The night of the ball arrived too quickly. Lydia stood in the entrance hall of Ashbourne House, her hands shaking inside her long gloves, while Victor adjusted his cufflinks with mechanical precision. Remember, he said, not looking at her, you don't engage with anyone I don't introduce you to first. You don't respond to provocations. You smile, you're gracious, you give them nothing to use against you. I understand. And if Adrian approaches, I stay silent and let you handle it. He finally looked at her then, his gaze sweeping from her carefully arranged hair to the hem of her gown. You look the part, at least. It wasn't a compliment, but it wasn't an insult either. From Victor, that was probably the best she could hope for. The carriage ride to Hastings Manor was silent. Lydia watched the city pass by through the window, trying to calm her racing heart. Beside her, Victor sat perfectly still, his face a mask of cold composure. Only the slight tension in his jaw betrayed any nervousness. Are you afraid? She asked quietly. No, fear is useless. I'm prepared. That's not the same thing. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. No, it's not. The carriage stopped. Through the window, Lydia could see the blaze of lights from the manor, hear the distant sound of music and laughter. Her last chance to back out was now, to claim illness, to retreat to safety. Instead, she took a deep breath and waited for the footman to open the door. Victor descended first, then turned to offer his hand. Lydia took it, her fingers trembling against his steady grip, and stepped into the lion's den. The entrance to Hastings Manor was packed with guests, all turning to stare as they were announced. His Grace, the Duke of Ashbourne, and Her Grace, the Duchess of Ashbourne. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence that fell over the crowd. Lydia felt the weight of every eye in the room, felt the judgment, the curiosity, the barely concealed contempt. Beside her, Victor's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on hers. A warning or reassurance, she couldn't tell. Then they were moving forward, into the ballroom proper, and the whispers started. "Is that really her? Plain little thing, isn't she? I heard she trapped him deliberately. Poor Catherine must be turning in her grave." Each word was a small cut, precise and deliberate. Lydia kept her face neutral, her smile fixed, even as her chest tightened with the effort of not reacting. Lord Hastings approached first, his wife trailing behind with barely concealed disdain. "Ashbourne, how unexpected to see you." His gaze slid to Lydia. "And your new Duchess. Congratulations on your recent nuptials." The emphasis on recent was deliberate, a reminder of how quickly, how scandalously, the marriage had happened. "Thank you, Hastings." Victor's voice was smooth, giving nothing away. "My wife was eager to make her debut in society. I trust we haven't inconvenienced you by attending?" "Not at all. Though I must admit we were surprised you'd want to subject the Duchess to such scrutiny so soon. The gossip has been extensive." "A gossip always is," Lydia said, finding her voice. "But I found that people who matter rarely indulge in it." Lady Hastings' eyes narrowed. "How quaint." It was a dismissal, clear and cutting, but before the awkwardness could deepen, another voice cut through the tension. "Victor, there you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." Adrian appeared at Victor's elbow, all charm and perfect timing. His eyes gleamed with something predatory as he turned to Lydia. "And the lovely Duchess. How wonderful to see you again. That gown is exquisite. Clearly my cousin has excellent taste when properly motivated." The implication hung in the air, that Victor's taste in wives was less about Lydia herself and more about desperate circumstances. Victor's jaw tightened. "Adrian, I wasn't aware you'd be attending." "I wouldn't miss it for the world. The winter ball is always such a revealing affair." He smiled at Lydia. "Tell me, Your Grace, how are you finding married life? Everything you hoped it would be?" It was a trap. Any answer she gave would be twisted, used against her. If she claimed happiness, she'd look naive. If she admitted difficulty, she'd prove their marriage was a sham. "I'm finding it educational," Lydia said carefully. "There's so much to learn about managing a household the size of Ashbourne House." "Indeed, though I imagine your previous experience as a governess prepared you somewhat. All that training in managing children." The pause was deliberate, the implication clear. She was still just a governess playing dress-up. Victor's hand moved to the small of Lydia's back, the first genuinely protective gesture he'd made all evening. "My wife's experience is exactly what makes her perfectly suited to her position. Eleanor adores her." "Yes, I heard Lady Eleanor has been spending quite a bit of time with her new stepmother." Adrian's smile sharpened. "Some might say too much time. After all, the girl is still grieving her real mother." The barb hit its mark. Lydia felt Victor go rigid beside her, saw the flash of genuine anger in his eyes before he controlled it. "Eleanor's well-being is not your concern, Adrian." "Everything about this family is my concern, cousin, especially when decisions are being made that affect the Ashbourne legacy." He turned to Lord Hastings, raising his voice just slightly, enough to draw attention from nearby guests. "I was just telling Lady Westbrook earlier how remarkable it is that Victor managed to find love again so soon after Catherine's death. Less than 2 years. Some might call it resilience. Others might call it hasty." The crowd was listening now. Lydia could feel their attention like weight pressing down on her shoulders. "I think," she heard herself say, "that grief doesn't follow a schedule, Mr. Ashbourne, and neither does life. We all cope in our own ways." "Of course. Though marrying one's employee does seem like a rather dramatic coping mechanism, wouldn't you say?" The gloves were off now. This wasn't subtle anymore. Adrian was openly challenging them in front of half of London's elite. Lydia could feel Victor preparing to respond, could sense the confrontation about to explode. She did something she'd promised herself she wouldn't do. She acted without thinking. "You seem very interested in my husband's choices, Mr. Ashbourne," she said, her voice carrying across the sudden quiet. "One might almost think you had a personal stake in whether our marriage succeeds or fails." Adrian's smile froze. "I'm merely concerned for my family." "Your family? Yes. How fortunate for Victor that he has such a devoted cousin. Tell me, Mr. Ashbourne, what exactly would happen if our marriage were deemed invalid? Theoretically speaking, of course." The silence that followed was absolute. Lydia had just done the one thing Victor told her not to do. She'd engaged directly with Adrian. Worse, she'd all but accused him publicly of having ulterior motives. But she'd also shifted the narrative. Suddenly, Adrian wasn't the concerned family member. He was the scheming cousin with something to gain from their failure. Adrian's expression went cold. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Your Grace." "I'm not implying anything. I'm simply curious about family dynamics." Lydia kept her voice light, innocent. "After all, I'm new to all this. The titles, the inheritance laws, the complicated webs of succession. It's all rather overwhelming." "Perhaps," Lady Westbrook interjected, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "your husband should have considered that before marrying someone so unfamiliar with our world." And there it was. The alliance Adrian had clearly been building, the support network ready to back his claims of Victor's poor judgment. Before Lydia could respond, Victor's voice cut through the tension like ice. "My wife is learning quickly, Lady Westbrook. In fact, she's proven remarkably adept at identifying those who wish us harm versus those who genuinely have our family's interests at heart." His gaze swept the watching crowd, cold and challenging. "I trust that distinction is clear to everyone present?" It was a gauntlet thrown, a line drawn. Stand with us or against us. Lord Hastings cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should all move to the dining room. Dinner will be served shortly." The crowd began to disperse, the immediate crisis diffused, if not resolved. As they moved toward the dining hall, Victor leaned down to murmur in Lydia's ear. "What part of don't engage was unclear to you?" "The part where your cousin was openly accusing you of being unstable while everyone watched." "I can handle Adrian." "Not alone. Not anymore." She kept her voice low, aware of the ears around them. "He's not just questioning your judgment, Victor. He's building a case. And every time we let him do it unopposed, we prove his point." "So your solution was to accuse him of conspiracy in front of half the ton?" "My solution was to make them question whose motives they should be doubting." Victor was silent for a moment. Then, grudgingly, "It wasn't entirely ineffective." Coming from him, it was practically glowing praise. Dinner was an exercise in endurance. Lydia was seated between Lord Pemberton, her former employer, who could barely look at her, and an elderly countess who spent the entire first course explaining in excruciating detail why mixed marriages between classes never worked. "Not that you're not perfectly pleasant, dear," the woman said, picking at her fish. "But there are certain things breeding teaches that simply can't be learned. Grace, poise, the ability to manage a household properly." "I managed the Pemberton household for 3 years," Lydia said quietly. "I believe I gave satisfaction." "Managing children is hardly the same as managing a duke's estate, child." Across the table, Adrian was holding court, entertaining a cluster of younger nobles with some story that kept making them laugh. Every so often, his gaze would flick to Lydia, calculating. Lord Pemberton finally spoke, his voice stiff with discomfort. "I trust you're settling in at Ashbourne House, that is, Your Grace." The slip was deliberate, a reminder that he still saw her as a governess, not a duchess. "Very well, thank you. Though I do miss the children sometimes. How are Caroline and Margaret?" "They're well. We've hired a new governess, a woman with impeccable references and appropriate discretion." The implication was clear, unlike you, unlike someone who caused scandal. Lydia set down her fork carefully, fighting the urge to defend herself. Victor's rules: don't engage, don't react. But across the table, she caught Adrian watching her with that predatory smile, and something inside her snapped. She was tired of being the weakness, tired of being the pawn everyone moved around the board. If she was going to survive this world, she needed to stop playing defense. "Lord Pemberton," she said, loud enough for nearby diners to hear. "I wonder if you might clarify something for me. When you dismissed me, you cited concerns about scandal. But the scandal itself, the rumors linking me to the Duke, they originated before I ever left your household, didn't they?" Pemberton's face reddened. "I don't see—" "I'm simply trying to understand the timeline, because it's rather curious, isn't it? The rumors started while I was still employed by you, yet I was dismissed for bringing scandal to your household, as if my mere presence, rather than the false gossip itself, was the problem." "Miss Hartwell, Duchess Ashbourne," Victor corrected coldly from down the table. His eyes were on Lydia, unreadable. "Yes, quite." Pemberton was sweating now. The circumstances were complicated. Were they? Or were they quite simple? Lydia kept her voice pleasant, curious. "Someone spread lies about me. You believed them without question. And rather than defend an employee of 3 years' good standing, you dismissed me to protect your own reputation. Is that accurate?" The table had gone quiet. Even Adrian had stopped talking, watching this exchange with fascinated attention. "I did what was necessary for my family," Pemberton said stiffly. "As did I," Lydia replied. "When those rumors destroyed my livelihood, I had a choice: accept ruin or accept the Duke's proposal. I chose survival. I'm not sure why that's considered scandalous while your abandonment of an innocent employee is considered prudent, but perhaps someone can explain the distinction to me." She'd done it again. Broken Victor's rules. Engaged when she should have stayed silent. But the look on Pemberton's face, the uncomfortable shifting of the other guests, told her she'd scored a hit. Adrian started a slow clap. "Well said, Your Grace. Truly, nothing like a bit of honest emotion to liven up a dinner party." The mockery in his voice was clear, but beneath it, Lydia detected something else. Uncertainty. She'd surprised him. "I apologize if I've made anyone uncomfortable," Lydia said, returning to her meal. "I'm still learning the rules of polite society. Sometimes my governess background shows through. We were trained to value truth over comfort." It was a gamble, owning her past rather than hiding from it. But the alternative, spending the entire evening being passively insulted, was unbearable. The dinner continued, but the dynamic had shifted. People were watching her now with more than just contempt. There was curiosity there, interest. Even from a few of the younger ladies, something that might have been respect. After dinner, the guests moved to the ballroom for dancing. Lydia stood near the windows, watching couples whirl across the floor, when Victor appeared at her elbow. "That was reckless." "I know." "I told you not to engage." "I know." "You made Pemberton look like a coward in front of the entire dinner party." "He is a coward." Lydia turned to face him. "He threw me away the moment keeping me became inconvenient. Why should I protect him?" Victor studied her for a long moment. "You're angry." "I'm furious. I'm tired of being polite to people who think I'm dirt on their shoes. Tired of pretending their contempt doesn't hurt. Tired of being your weakness." "You're not—" "Yes, I am. We both know it. Adrian knows it. Everyone in this room knows it." She took a breath, steadying herself. "But I'm learning that weakness is only permanent if you accept it. So I'm not going to keep playing the victim. If they want to look down on me, fine. But I'm going to make them work for it." Something flickered in Victor's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you." The music swelled, a new dance beginning. Around them, couples were forming up for a waltz. Victor held out his hand. "Dance with me." It wasn't a request, but it wasn't quite an order either. Lydia took his hand and he led her onto the floor. His grip was firm, confident, as he placed his other hand at her waist and began to guide her through the steps. "You dance well," he said after a moment. "Governesses are taught everything ladies are taught. We just don't get to use it much. You're using it now." "Because I have to. Because hiding didn't work." She met his eyes as they turned. "You wanted me to be invisible tonight, to let you handle everything. But that's not going to stop Adrian. He'll keep pushing until one of us breaks. So you decided to push back? Yes. They turned again, the candlelight catching on the emerald silk of her gown. Around them, Lydia could feel people watching, judging, speculating, wondering. You realize, Victor said quietly, that everything you said tonight will be in the scandal sheets by morning. They'll twist it, make you sound hysterical or vengeful or desperate. Let them. At least they'll be talking about something I actually said instead of inventing stories out of nothing. He almost smiled. Almost. You have more courage than sense. Eleanor said you told Mr. Collins the same thing. Eleanor talks too much. But there was affection in his voice when he said it, the first real warmth Lydia had heard from him. The dance ended, and they separated. But as Victor led her from the floor, his hand remained at the small of her back, a silent declaration of partnership that didn't go unnoticed. They made it through another hour of forced pleasantries and thinly veiled insults before Victor finally declared they'd stayed long enough. The carriage ride home was quiet, both of them exhausted by the evening's battles. You know this isn't over, Victor said as Ashbourne House came into view. Adrian won't stop. Tonight probably only made him more determined. I know, but at least now he knows I won't just stand there and let him destroy us without fighting back. Victor looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since the wedding. Why are you doing this? You could have stayed silent tonight, played it safe. Instead, you made yourself a target. Because I'm already a target, Victor, and I'd rather be a target who fights than one who just waits to be destroyed. The carriage stopped. The footman opened the door, and they descended into the cold night air. For what it's worth, Victor said as they climbed the steps to the entrance, you were right about one thing. We can't keep defending. If we're going to beat Adrian, we need to take the offensive. What did you have in mind? I don't know yet, but I'm starting to think, he paused, something like respect crossing his face. I'm starting to think that marrying you might have been the smartest decision I've made in years. It wasn't love, it wasn't even affection, but it was acknowledgement, recognition that she might be more than just a convenient solution to his problems. Inside the house, Mrs. Brennan waited in the entrance hall, her face pinched with disapproval. Your Grace, a letter arrived for you this evening, marked urgent. Victor took it, breaking the seal with practiced efficiency. As he read, his expression darkened. What is it? Lydia asked. He handed her the letter without a word. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, unfamiliar. Your Grace, you don't know me, but I know you. Or rather, I know what you've become, the woman who trapped the Duke into marriage through scandal and manipulation. I thought you should know that several of us have been discussing your situation. We've come to the conclusion that someone needs to act in poor Eleanor's best interests, since her father clearly can't be trusted to do so anymore. Expect us at Ashbourne House next week. We intend to assess the child's living conditions and determine whether she's being properly cared for by someone of your limited qualifications. Do give the Duke our regards. A concerned friend of the family. Lydia read it twice, her hands trembling with fury. They're going to try to take Eleanor. They're going to try to prove I'm an unfit father, Victor corrected grimly, and use you as evidence. Victor crumpled the letter in his fist, his knuckles white with barely controlled rage. This has Adrian written all over it. Can they actually do this? Take her away? If they can prove neglect or incompetence, yes. The courts favor blood relatives in custody matters, especially when there's a question of moral fitness. He stalked toward his study, Lydia following close behind. And a duke who married his daughter's governess less than 2 years after his wife's death? That's exactly the kind of moral unfitness they'll argue. Lydia's mind was racing. Who would they give her to? Adrian? Most likely. As my closest male relative, he'd have the strongest claim. Victor poured himself a whiskey, drained it in one swallow. That's what this has been about from the beginning. Not just the title, Eleanor. Control her, and you control the Ashbourne legacy until she's of age. Then we stop them. How? We can't prevent them from coming. Refusing entry would only make us look like we have something to hide. He poured another drink, his hand unsteady. They'll inspect the house, interview the staff, spend time with Eleanor. And every servant who resents you, every maid who remembers Catherine, every person in this household who thinks I made a mistake marrying you, they'll tell these women exactly what they want to hear. The hopelessness in his voice was worse than anger. This was a man who'd already lost one wife, already buried too much grief. The thought of losing his daughter, too, was breaking him. Lydia took the whiskey glass from his hand, set it down firmly. Then we make sure they have nothing to find. We turn this household into a model of domestic perfection in 1 week. That's impossible. So was surviving that dinner party, but we did it. She was thinking fast now, strategy crystallizing. The staff, they'll need to present a united front. No complaints about me, no gossip about our marriage. Can you make that happen? I can try, but I can't control what they actually think. You don't need to control what they think, just what they say. Lydia began pacing, her earlier exhaustion forgotten. And Eleanor, she needs to be prepared. They'll question her about me, about her life here. We need to make sure she understands what's at stake. She's 7 years old, Lydia. I'm not going to terrify her with the possibility of being taken away. Then we terrify her with the possibility of losing you. Lydia stopped, facing him. Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? They want to separate you from your daughter, use her as leverage to force you out of the title. We need Eleanor to understand that staying with us isn't just about her comfort, it's about keeping her family intact. Victor stared at her like he'd never really seen her before. When did you become so calculating? When I realized being nice and quiet and grateful wasn't going to save us. She moved closer, urgent. I spent 6 years being invisible, Victor, accepting whatever scraps people gave me because I thought that was all I deserved. But I'm not that woman anymore. I can't be. Not if we're going to survive this. He was silent for a long moment. Then, what do you need from me? Support, publicly and privately. If the staff sees you treating me like an actual partner instead of an unwanted obligation, they're more likely to fall in line. I don't know how to do that. The admission was so honest, so raw, that it stopped Lydia short. Victor Ashbourne, cold, controlled, unshakable, didn't know how to pretend affection, couldn't fake warmth even to save his daughter. Then we'll figure it out together, she said quietly. Starting now. No more separate bedrooms. No more avoiding each other. If these women are going to investigate our marriage, they need to see an actual marriage. You want to share a bedroom? I want them to believe we share a bedroom. Where we actually sleep is irrelevant. Though the thought of being that close to him, of inhabiting the same intimate space, made her stomach flutter with something she couldn't quite name. But yes, starting tomorrow, we present as a united couple in every way. Victor nodded slowly. This is going to be hell. Yes, but it's hell with a purpose. The next morning, Lydia called a household meeting. Every member of staff, from the butler down to the scullery maids, gathered in the main hall while she stood on the stairs, a position of authority she'd never dared claim before. Mrs. Brennan's face was already pinched with disapproval. Thank you all for coming, Lydia began, her voice carrying across the silent room. I know many of you have concerns about recent changes in this household, about my marriage to the Duke, about my qualifications to serve as Duchess. She could see the confirmation in their faces. Yes, they had concerns, plenty of them. I'm not here to address those concerns. Your personal opinions of me are your own business. She paused, letting that sink in. But what happens in this household over the next week is everyone's business. Because next week, we're going to receive visitors who want to find fault with how this house is run. Who want to prove that Lady Eleanor is being neglected. Who want to take her away from her father. That got their attention. Several of the younger maids gasped. Even Mrs. Brennan looked shocked. I don't care if you like me, Lydia continued. I don't care if you think I belong here. But I know, all of you know, that Lady Eleanor belongs with her father. And if these visitors find any evidence of dysfunction, any hint of impropriety, they will use it as grounds to remove her from this house. Mr. Collins, the butler, cleared his throat. What exactly are you asking of us, Your Grace? Loyalty. Not to me, to this family, to Eleanor. Lydia descended the stairs, moving among them. When these women come, they'll ask you questions about the Duke's state of mind, about my relationship with Lady Eleanor, about whether this household is properly managed, And I need you to tell them the truth, that this is a good home, with a loving father and a stepmother who cares deeply for her stepdaughter's welfare. Even if that's not entirely accurate? Mrs. Brennan's voice was sharp. Is it not accurate, Mrs. Brennan? Lydia turned to face her directly. Has Lady Eleanor been mistreated since I arrived? Has she been neglected? Has anyone in this household given her anything less than devoted care? The housekeeper's mouth tightened. No. Then there's no deception involved, just honesty about what actually happens here. Lydia softened her voice slightly. I know I'm not what you wanted. I know you all love the first Duchess and resent my presence in her place. But Eleanor, she didn't choose any of this. She's already lost her mother. Don't let your disapproval of me cost her everything else. The silence that followed was heavy. Then Mrs. Shaw, the cook, spoke up. What do you need us to do? Relief flooded through Lydia. Make this house perfect. Not just clean, perfect. The kind of home no one could possibly criticize. And when they ask about the Duke and me, she swallowed hard. Tell them you've seen us together, happy, building a life. You want us to lie, Mrs. Brennan said flatly. I want you to help us protect Eleanor. Victor's voice cut through the tension. He'd appeared at the top of the stairs, still in his morning clothes, but his presence immediately shifted the dynamic. The Duchess is right. These visitors don't care about truth, they care about ammunition. We're not giving them any. He descended the stairs, came to stand beside Lydia. Then, deliberately, he took her hand. The gesture was clearly unfamiliar to him. His grip was too tight, too formal, but the staff noticed. For the next week, Victor continued, you will treat the Duchess with the same respect you would have given Catherine. You will answer questions about our household honestly, yes, but you will remember that honesty includes the good as well as any perceived flaws. Is that understood? A murmur of yes, your grace rippled through the crowd. Dismissed. As the staff dispersed, Lydia realized Victor was still holding her hand. His palm was warm, slightly rough. She'd never touched him like this before, not without gloves, not without the formal distance their arrangement demanded. That was well done, he said quietly, not letting go. Which part? The speech or the emotional manipulation? Both. He finally released her hand but didn't step away. I meant what I said, about treating you with respect. I should have enforced that from the beginning. You were grieving, are grieving. Lydia studied his face, seeing the exhaustion etched in every line. I don't expect you to pretend I'm Catherine. Good. Because I couldn't. Something painful flickered across his expression. But I can try to treat you like the partner you've proven to be. Starting with this, we need to prepare Eleanor. They found her in the nursery, bent over a watercolor painting that was more enthusiastic than skillful. She looked up when they entered together, an unusual enough occurrence that her eyes widened. Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart. Victor crossed to her, crouched down to her level. But we need to talk to you about something important. Eleanor set down her brush, suddenly serious. Is someone sick? No, nothing like that. He glanced at Lydia, who joined them at the small table. Some ladies are going to visit next week. They want to meet you, see how you're doing. Like a social call? Sort of, except they're going to ask you questions about living here, about me and about Lydia. The girl's face scrunched with confusion. Why? Because they don't think I should have married Lydia so quickly after your mother died, Victor said, with a bluntness Lydia wouldn't have chosen, but somehow felt right. They think I'm not making good decisions, and they might try to use you to prove that. That's stupid. You make good decisions all the time. Thank you, but they don't know that. So they're going to ask you things like whether you're happy here, whether Lydia is nice to you, whether I spend time with you. Eleanor looked between them, processing. What am I supposed to say? The truth, Lydia interjected. Always the truth, Eleanor. We're not asking you to lie, but we want you to understand that your answers matter. If they think you're unhappy or mistreated, they might try to take you away to live somewhere else. Away from father? The fear in her voice was immediate, visceral. We won't let that happen, Victor said firmly. But we need you to help us. Can you do that? Eleanor nodded, her small face determined. I'll tell them you're the best father in the world and that Lydia is nice and that I'm very happy here. Only if it's true, Lydia reminded her gently. It is true. Mostly. Eleanor paused. You're not my real mother. I want them to know that. I won't pretend you are. The honesty hurt, but Lydia respected it. I would never ask you to. Your mother was Catherine. I'm just someone who lives here now and cares about you. Do you really care? Or are you just saying that because Father told you to? It was such a direct question, so completely without artifice, that Lydia found herself answering with equal honesty. I really care. You're a clever, brave little girl who's been through something terrible and is still trying every day to be okay. How could I not care about that? Eleanor studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, I'll help. After Eleanor returned to her painting, Victor walked Lydia out into the hallway. She's stronger than I give her credit for, he said quietly. She's your daughter. Of course she is. They stood there in the corridor, neither quite ready to part. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows caught dust motes in the air, turned everything golden and strange. I should move my things to your room, Victor said abruptly. If we're going to convince them we share sleeping quarters, there should be evidence. Right. Yes, that makes sense. Lydia's heart was doing something complicated in her chest. I can have Mary prepare. I'll handle it. It's going to be awkward enough without involving the staff more than necessary. He rubbed the back of his neck, a rare gesture of discomfort. We should probably discuss boundaries, expectations. We're adults, Victor. I think we can manage to share a room without incident. It's not the sharing I'm concerned about. It's the pretending. He met her eyes. They're going to expect to see affection, intimacy, things we don't have. Then we learn, quickly. Lydia forced herself to sound more confident than she felt. We hold hands in public. You touch my shoulder when passing. I smile at you like you've said something charming. It's just performance. I'm not good at performance. Neither am I, but we're going to have to be. That evening, Victor's belongings appeared in Lydia's, their bedroom. Not many things. He was surprisingly sparse in his personal effects, but seeing his dressing gown hanging beside hers, his books on the nightstand, his presence imprinted on the space that had been solely hers, it made everything startlingly real. They navigated the evening with the awkwardness of strangers forced into proximity. Victor disappeared into his dressing room to change for bed. Lydia did the same, both of them performing this intimate ritual in careful isolation. When they finally both emerged, Lydia in her nightgown and wrapper, Victor in shirt sleeves and trousers, they stood on opposite sides of the massive bed like it was a chasm. This is ridiculous, Lydia said finally. It's just sleeping. Right, just sleeping. But Victor looked as uncomfortable as she felt. They climbed into bed from their respective sides, maintaining a careful distance. The mattress was large enough that they didn't have to touch, but Lydia was hyper-aware of his presence anyway. The sound of his breathing, the warmth radiating from his side of the bed, the slight depression in the mattress from his weight. "Good night," she said to the darkness. "Good night." Neither of them slept well. The week that followed was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Lydia threw herself into household management with single-minded intensity, working alongside Mrs. Brennan to ensure every room was spotless, every meal perfectly executed, every routine optimized for efficiency. The housekeeper remained coldly professional, but Lydia caught her once looking at the newly organized linen closet with something that might have been grudging approval. "You have a decent eye for organization," Mrs. Brennan admitted. "Better than I expected. I managed the Pemberton household for 3 years. I might not have been born to this, but I learned it thoroughly." "So I see." The housekeeper paused. "For what it's worth, Lady Eleanor seems happier. She smiles more since you arrived." It was the closest thing to a compliment Lydia had received from the woman. She took it. Meanwhile, Victor threw himself into being visibly present. He joined them for breakfast every morning, played chess with Eleanor in the evenings, even sat with Lydia in the drawing room after dinner instead of disappearing into his study. Each interaction was slightly stilted, as if he were learning a foreign language, but he was trying. And slowly, Incrementally, the household began to shift. The maids stopped whispering quite so obviously when Lydia passed. Mr. Collins started asking her preferences about dinner menus. Even the footman began treating her commands with something resembling respect. 3 days before the inspection, Lydia was reviewing Eleanor's wardrobe, making sure she had appropriate, well-maintained dresses, when the girl spoke up. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you love my father?" Lydia's hand stilled on the dress she was examining. "That's a complicated question, Eleanor." "You always say things are complicated when you don't want to answer." "Fair point." Lydia sat down on the bed beside her stepdaughter. "I care about your father. I respect him. I want good things for him. But love, that takes time. We barely knew each other when we married." "But you're married now. Don't married people have to love each other?" "Ideally, yes. But life doesn't always work ideally." Lydia chose her words carefully. "Your father married me because we both needed help. I needed protection from scandal. He needed someone to help care for you. It was practical." "That sounds lonely." The observation, delivered in such a matter-of-fact child's voice, hit harder than it should have. "Sometimes it is," Lydia admitted, "but practical doesn't mean bad. And sometimes, if you're lucky, practical can turn into something more." "Has it turned into something more?" Lydia thought about Victor's hand on her back at the ball, the way he'd stood beside her during the household meeting, the careful distance he maintained in their shared bed, respecting her space even in sleep, the moments when he almost smiled at something she said. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I hope so." Eleanor seemed satisfied with that answer. As she should be. It was the truest thing Lydia had said in weeks. The night before the inspection, Lydia couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, listening to Victor's steady breathing, and tried to prepare herself for what was coming. These women, whoever they were, would be looking for any excuse to condemn her, any sign of weakness or impropriety. "You're thinking too loud." Victor's voice in the darkness made her jump. "I thought you were asleep." "I was trying, but your anxiety is practically vibrating through the mattress." "Sorry, I'll try to be less anxious." A pause. Then, "Come here." "What?" "If we're going to pretend to be a married couple tomorrow, we should probably look like we've actually slept in the same bed. Right now there's such a vast distance between us that it's obvious we never touch." He was right. The gap between them was ridiculous. But crossing it felt dangerous in ways Lydia couldn't quite articulate. Still, she moved closer. Tentatively, awkwardly, until she was near enough to feel his warmth. "Closer," Victor said. "They'll check the sheets, the pillows, evidence of whether we share space naturally." Lydia closed the remaining distance, her shoulder nearly touching his. This close, she could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong. Could smell cedar and tobacco and something uniquely him. "Better?" she whispered. "Better?" His voice was rough. "For what it's worth, I think we're going to survive tomorrow." "You sound more confident than you did a week ago." "A week ago, I thought we were fighting separate battles. Now," he shifted slightly, his arm brushing hers. "Now it feels like we might actually be on the same side." "We are. We always have been, really. It just took us a while to realize it." They lay there in the darkness, not quite touching, but not quite separate either. And somewhere in that careful proximity, Lydia finally fell asleep. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and Victor, already up, half-dressed, looking at something that had been slipped under their door during the night. "What is it?" He handed her the note without a word. The handwriting was familiar, Mrs. Brennan's precise script. "Your Grace, thought you should know, one of the visiting ladies is Lady Catherine's sister, Margaret Thornwood. She's been telling people that Eleanor deserves to be raised by family who truly loved Catherine, not strangers. The staff is prepared to support you, as instructed. But be ready. Lady Margaret will not be swayed by perfect linens and pleasant smiles." Lydia read it twice, her stomach sinking. Catherine's sister, she'll know Eleanor. Have a legitimate claim. To care about her, yes. To take her, no. Margaret has no legal standing. But Victor's face was pale. She does, however, have moral authority. If she argues that Eleanor should be with blood family who remembers Catherine, then we lose. The inspection party arrived at precisely 10 o'clock. 4 women, dressed in severe black as if attending a funeral. Lady Margaret Thornwood led them, her resemblance to the portrait of Catherine in the gallery so striking that Lydia felt like she'd been struck. This was what a proper duchess looked like. Elegant, refined, devastatingly beautiful even in mourning clothes. No wonder the staff resented Lydia so thoroughly. Your Grace. Lady Margaret's courtesy was icily correct. Thank you for receiving us. Of course, Victor's voice gave away nothing. May I introduce my wife, the Duchess of Ashbourne? The way Lady Margaret's eyes raked over Lydia was withering. Yes, I've heard so much about you, Your Grace, all of it fascinating. Translation, all of it damning. The other 3 women introduced themselves, Lady Westbrook, whom Lydia recognized from the ball, and 2 others whose names immediately fled her panic-stricken mind. We'd like to tour the house, Lady Margaret announced, particularly the nursery and family quarters. We need to assess the environment in which Eleanor is being raised. Of course, Lydia said, proud of how steady her voice remained. Would you like me to show you personally? That won't be necessary. We'll manage on our own. We want to see the household as it actually is, not as you'd present it. It was a deliberate slight, refusing Lydia's hospitality, implying she'd hide evidence if given the chance. Victor's jaw tightened. My wife runs this household, Lady Margaret. If you have questions about its management, she's the appropriate person to address them. I'm sure she runs it quite competently. For someone of her background. Lady Margaret smiled, cold and sharp. But we're not here to evaluate housekeeping skills. We're here to evaluate Eleanor's welfare. Then perhaps you should actually speak to Eleanor, Lydia said, meeting that sharp gaze directly. She's in the nursery. I'm sure she'd love to see her aunt. The dig landed. Lady Margaret clearly hadn't visited Eleanor at all since Catherine's death. Her face tightened. We'll speak to her shortly. First, the house. They swept past, leaving Lydia and Victor standing in the entrance hall. That could have gone better, Victor muttered. Could it? She hates me on sight. Nothing I said was going to change that. They followed at a discreet distance as the inspection party moved through Ashbourne House, watching them examine rooms with critical eyes, whisper to each other, make notes in small leather journals. Every imperfection, a slightly dusty corner, a missing button on a footman's uniform, was catalogued like evidence. When they reached Eleanor's room, the girl was waiting, dressed in her finest day dress, hair perfectly brushed, looking every inch the proper young lady. Aunt Margaret, she curtsied beautifully. It's been a long time. Too long, darling. Lady Margaret's voice softened genuinely for the first time. Look at you. You've grown so much. I'm 7 now, almost 7.5. Of course you are. Margaret knelt down, studying Eleanor's face with something like hunger. Are you happy here, sweetheart? Truly? Eleanor glanced at Lydia, then back to her aunt. Yes, very happy. And your father? He treats you well? Spends time with you? He plays chess with me every evening and reads to me sometimes. And the new Duchess? The warmth drained from Margaret's voice. How does she treat you? She's teaching me. Mathematics and French and literature. She's very clever. I'm sure. But is she kind? Does she make you feel safe? Eleanor's pause was just a fraction too long. She's not mean. It wasn't the ringing endorsement they needed. Lydia's heart sank. Eleanor, she said gently, stepping forward, can you tell your aunt about our lessons? What we've been studying? We're reading Shakespeare, Eleanor reported dutifully, and learning about the Roman Empire, and yesterday we did experiments with light and prisms. How educational. Margaret stood, her hand lingering on Eleanor's shoulder possessively. Tell me, darling, do you miss your mother? The question was calculated cruelty. Eleanor's face crumpled. Every day, she whispered. Of course you do. And I'm sure having a stranger in her place must be very confusing, very painful. Lady Margaret, Victor's voice was ice. That's enough. Is it? I'm simply asking my niece about her feelings, unless you'd prefer she suppress them? Pretend everything is perfect when it's clearly not? I'd prefer you not use a 7-year-old's grief as a weapon. I'm protecting her from a situation that should never have happened. Margaret's composure finally cracked, showing the fury beneath. Catherine was everything, Victor. Everything. And less than 2 years later, you've replaced her with this? She gestured at Lydia with obvious contempt. Don't. Victor's voice was deadly quiet. Don't you dare diminish my wife or my choices in front of my daughter. Your daughter deserves better than this farce of a marriage. My daughter deserves stability and love, both of which she's receiving. From a governess playing dress-up? From a man so consumed by grief he married the first convenient woman he could find? Margaret was openly crying now. Catherine would be ashamed of you, Victor, ashamed of what you've become. The words hung in the air like poison. Lydia saw the moment they hit Victor, saw him flinch like he'd been struck, because some part of him, the part still raw with grief, believed Margaret was right. And then Eleanor spoke. You're wrong. Everyone turned to look at her. The little girl stood rigid, her fists clenched, tears streaming down her face. Mother wouldn't be ashamed. She'd want Father to be happy. She'd want me to be cared for. Eleanor's voice shook but didn't break. And Lydia does care for me. She asks about my day and helps with my lessons and doesn't try to pretend she's my mother, but she's still here. Which is more than you've been, Aunt Margaret. The accusation from such a small voice was devastating. Margaret looked stricken. Eleanor, I've been in mourning for 2 years while I was here alone missing Mother too, and you never visited, never wrote, not until you decided to use me to hurt Father. That's not... I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection from Father or from Lydia. Eleanor crossed to Victor, took his hand. I need protection from people who want to take me away from my home because they don't like Father's choices. The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Margaret stood frozen, staring at her niece like she'd never seen her before. The other women looked deeply uncomfortable. Even Victor seemed shocked. Finally, Margaret drew herself up. I see. I've clearly misunderstood the situation. You've understood it perfectly, Lydia said quietly. You just don't like it, and I'm sorry for that, Lady Margaret. I'm sorry I'm not Catherine. I'm sorry this family moved forward when you haven't been able to. But Eleanor deserves to live her life, not be frozen in grief to make everyone else more comfortable. How dare you say... She's right. Everyone turned. Victor stepped forward, still holding Eleanor's hand, his face set with something like determination. You want to know if I'm fit to raise my daughter? Fine. Here's the truth. I was drowning after Catherine died. Completely lost. I couldn't see past my own pain long enough to notice that Eleanor was drowning too. And yes, marrying Lydia was desperate and impulsive and probably slightly mad. He looked at Lydia then, really looked at her. But it saved us, both of us. Because Lydia doesn't let me hide in grief. She doesn't let Eleanor hide either. She makes us show up for our lives even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. His voice roughened. She's not Catherine. She'll never be Catherine. But she's exactly what we needed, what I needed. And if you can't see that, if all you see is scandal and impropriety, then you're not qualified to judge what's best for Eleanor. Lydia felt something crack open in her chest, something painful and terrifying and entirely too close to hope. Lady Margaret stared at him for a long moment, then she closed her notebook with a decisive snap. I came here expecting to find chaos, neglect, evidence that you'd lost yourself completely. She looked at Eleanor, at Victor, finally at Lydia. Instead, I find a child who's articulate and loved and brave enough to defend her family. A father who's finally fighting for something besides his own isolation. And a woman who... She paused. A woman who has no business being this competent given the impossible position she was placed in. Is that a compliment or an insult? Lydia asked. Both, possibly. Margaret tucked her notebook away. I won't be filing any reports about Eleanor's welfare. Clearly, she's exactly where she needs to be. The relief was dizzying, but before Lydia could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway below. Raised voices, something breaking. Then Mrs. Brennan's voice, sharp with alarm. You can't be here. His Grace specifically. His Grace can go to hell. Adrian Ashbourne appeared in the nursery doorway, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, his eyes bright with something dangerous. "Ladies," he said, sketching a mocking bow toward the inspection party. "How convenient! Witnesses." "Adrian." Victor moved to place himself between his cousin and Eleanor. "Leave. Now." "Oh, I don't think so. See, I've just come from Lord Pemberton's house. Had the most interesting conversation with his children. Apparently, they remember Miss Hartwell quite well from her time as their governess." Adrian's smile was vicious. "Would you like to know what else they remember?" Lydia's blood turned to ice. No, he couldn't. "They remember," Adrian continued, pulling a letter from his coat, "that Miss Hartwell had several male visitors during her employment there. Late-night visitors, meeting her in the gardens, in dark corners of the house. One of them, as it happens, matched your description perfectly, Victor." The implication was clear, that Lydia hadn't been an innocent victim of scandal. She'd been conducting an actual affair, that she'd deliberately sought out Victor to trap him into marriage. "That's a lie," Victor said flatly. "Is it? Caroline Pemberton is 12 years old, precocious, observant, and willing to swear before witnesses that she saw Miss Hartwell sneaking out to meet you more than once before the scandal broke. He'd gotten to the children, coached them, used their childish desire for drama to create a narrative that would destroy everything." "The timeline doesn't work," Lydia said, her voice shaking. "I met the Duke for the first time the night he proposed. That meeting in the garden, that was our first conversation." "According to you, but we have a witness who says otherwise. A child with no reason to lie. Except that you've clearly paid or threatened the Pembertons into coaching her." Victor's voice was deadly calm. "No one will believe this, Adrian." "Won't they? A governess desperate for a better life, a grief-stricken Duke vulnerable to manipulation, secret meetings, a hasty marriage after a convenient scandal." Adrian looked at the watching women, playing to his audience. "It's far more plausible than your version of events." Lady Margaret was watching this exchange with obvious calculation. "If what you're saying is true, Mr. Ashbourne, then this marriage was based on fraud, which would indeed call into question the Duke's judgment regarding Eleanor's care." "Exactly." Adrian looked triumphant. "Thank you, Lady Margaret. Finally, someone who sees sense. But," Margaret continued coolly, "it would require proving those allegations. And I'm not inclined to believe the coached testimony of a 12-year-old over my own observations. This household is functional. Eleanor is thriving. The Duke and Duchess may have an unconventional marriage, but it's clearly no fraud." Adrian's face darkened. "You're making a mistake. The only mistake would be allowing you to manipulate the situation for your own gain." She turned to Victor. "Your Grace, I suggest you have your cousin escorted from the premises. Immediately." "With pleasure." Victor rang for the footman. But Adrian wasn't finished. He pulled something else from his coat, another document, and threw it at Victor's feet. "I've already filed a formal petition with the courts, questioning your fitness as Duke and Guardian. This farce of an inspection doesn't matter. The law will decide." He looked at Eleanor, his expression almost pitying. "I'm sorry, little cousin, but this is for the best. You'll see that eventually." Then he was gone, being forcibly removed by 3 footmen while he shouted about corruption and justice. The silence he left behind was suffocating. Eleanor was crying. Lady Margaret looked grim. Victor stood frozen, staring at the petition document like it might burst into flames. And Lydia realized, with horrible clarity, that they'd won the battle but might still lose the war. Victor bent to retrieve the petition, his movements slow and deliberate. When he straightened, his face had gone completely blank, that terrible controlled emptiness that meant he was barely holding himself together. "I need to speak with my solicitor," he said to no one in particular. "Immediately." Lady Margaret cleared her throat. "Your Grace, if I may, this petition is serious, but it's not insurmountable. Adrian will need substantial evidence to convince a judge that you're unfit. Coached testimony from children won't be enough." "It might be if we can't prove it's coached." Victor's voice was hollow. "The Pembertons have no reason to support me. Every reason to support Adrian if he's offered them something." "Then we find reasons," Lydia said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. The panic she'd felt moments ago was crystallizing into something harder, sharper. We fight this, properly. How? Adrian's been planning this for months. We've been reacting, scrambling. We're always 3 steps behind. Then we stopped reacting. Lydia took the petition from his hands, scanned it quickly. Legal language, mostly incomprehensible, but certain phrases jumped out. Questionable judgment, hasty marriage, potential mental instability following spousal loss. Adrian's entire case rests on the narrative that you married me out of grief-induced madness, that I manipulated a vulnerable man. We need to destroy that narrative completely. And how do you propose we do that? By telling our actual story, publicly. The idea was forming even as she spoke it. Not the sanitized version we've been presenting, the real one. Why you proposed. Why I accepted. The practical reasons that had nothing to do with manipulation or delusion. Lady Westbrook, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. You want to admit the marriage was a business arrangement? That seems unwise. More unwise than letting Adrian paint us as a scandalous love affair or a calculated trap? Lydia shook her head. The truth is less romantic but far less damning. 2 adults making a rational decision to solve mutual problems. There's nothing unfit about that. Victor was staring at her like she'd grown a second head. You want to tell society our marriage is essentially a contract? I want to tell them it's a partnership. Which it is. She met his eyes, willing him to understand. Adrian thinks our weakness is the unconventional nature of our relationship. But it's actually our strength. We're not blinded by emotion. We're clear-headed, strategic, exactly the kind of thinking a duke should employ. The scandal sheets will have a field day. Let them. As long as the courts see a competent partnership rather than a delusion or a trap, that's what matters. Lady Margaret was nodding slowly. It's bold, unconventional, but it might work. The law cares about Eleanor's welfare and your capacity to provide it. If you can demonstrate sound reasoning, then the marriage itself becomes evidence of fitness rather than unfitness, Lydia finished. We need to control this narrative before Adrian does, starting now. Victor looked at the petition again, then at Eleanor, who was still crying quietly against the nursery window. Something in his expression shifted, hardened with purpose rather than despair. All right, we do it your way. He turned to Lady Margaret. I assume you're well connected enough to get word to the right people? The ones who actually matter? I can certainly ensure your version of events reaches sympathetic ears. Margaret's smile was small but genuine. And I happen to know several judges who value rational thinking over romantic nonsense. They might be persuaded that your arrangement shows admirable pragmatism. Thank you. Victor's voice was rough with something that might have been gratitude. After the inspection party departed, with promises of support rather than condemnation, Lydia found herself alone with Victor in his study. Eleanor had been settled with her dinner and a soothing story from Mrs. Shaw. The house had finally gone quiet. That was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced, Victor said, pouring them both whiskey without asking. And I fought in 2 wars. At least in war, you knew who the enemy was. Lydia accepted the glass, drained half of it in one burning swallow. Adrian hid behind concern and propriety while preparing to destroy us. He's not done yet. This petition, it'll take weeks to move through the courts, maybe months, and the whole time we'll be under scrutiny. Any mistake, any slip, then we don't slip. Lydia set down her glass with a decisive click. We need to be perfect, not just in private, but everywhere. Every social event, every public appearance. We need to present such a united, competent front that the idea of you being unfit becomes laughable. That's exhausting just thinking about it. Yes, but the alternative is losing Eleanor. Victor flinched. He moved to the window, staring out at the darkening gardens. I keep thinking about what Margaret said, that Catherine would be ashamed of me. Margaret was grieving, lashing out. But she wasn't entirely wrong, was she? She was everything you're supposed to want in a wife. Beautiful, accomplished, perfectly bred for this life. And I replaced her with... He stopped himself, but the damage was done. With a governess who doesn't know which fork to use at formal dinners, Lydia finished flatly. Yes, We've established that I'm a disappointment by conventional standards. That's not what I meant, isn't it? She stood, anger finally breaking through her careful control. You've made it very clear that this marriage is a practical arrangement, that I'm a solution to a problem, not an actual partner you chose. But here's what you need to understand, Victor. I'm fighting for this family anyway, not because I'm paid to, not because I'm obligated to, but because Eleanor deserves stability and you deserve peace, and I refuse to let Adrian win. Why? Why do you care so much? The question stopped her. Why did she care? She'd entered this marriage as a transaction, survival in exchange for service. When had it become something more? Because, she said slowly, working it out as she spoke, for the first time in my life, I'm not invisible. I matter. My choices have weight, and maybe that's selfish, but it's also freeing. I spent years being nothing to anyone. Now I'm a duchess, a stepmother, someone worth destroying, which means I'm also someone worth defending. Victor turned from the window, his expression unreadable. You are worth defending. You know that, right? Not just as a tactical asset, but as yourself. It was the closest he'd ever come to genuine sentiment. Lydia felt something warm and dangerous bloom in her chest. We should probably practice, she said, deflecting before the moment could deepen into something she wasn't ready for. Being affectionate in public. If we're going to convince everyone this partnership is solid, we need to look comfortable together. Practice affection. Right. Victor looked distinctly uncomfortable. How does one practice that? Start simple. Hold my hand like you mean it, not like you're escorting an elderly aunt. He crossed to her, took her hand. His grip was firm but impersonal, exactly the problem. No, like this. Lydia adjusted their hands, threading her fingers through his, bringing them closer together. See? It's more intimate, connected. This feels ridiculous. It looks natural. That's what matters. She was acutely aware of how close they were standing now, how warm his hand was in hers. And when we're in public, you should touch my back sometimes, casually, like you're used to it. Show me. Lydia placed her free hand on the small of his back, light but present. Like that. It's possessive without being aggressive, protective. Victor mirrored the gesture, his hand settling at her waist. The touch sent unexpected electricity through her. This is... He trailed off, but didn't move away. Necessary, Lydia finished. If we're going to sell this partnership, we need to look like we actually enjoy each other's company. And do we? Enjoy each other's company? She considered the question honestly. Sometimes, when you're not being insufferably distant or treating me like a particularly troublesome household expense. I don't... He stopped, reconsidered. I suppose I do, don't I? Treat you like an obligation rather than a person. Most of the time, yes. I'm sorry for that. His hand was still at her waist, neither of them seeming willing to break contact. I'm not good at this. At being open. Catherine used to say I had all the emotional availability of a stone wall. She wasn't wrong, but Lydia softened it with a small smile. Though I've seen cracks in that wall lately, when Eleanor was crying, when Adrian threatened us. You feel things, Victor. You just hide them extremely well. Feeling things got me nowhere after Catherine died. Control was all I had left. And now? Now I'm starting to think control might not be enough. He stepped back, breaking the contact, and Lydia felt the loss of warmth keenly. We should have dinner. Keep up appearances for the staff. It was a deflection, but she let him have it. Progress happened in inches with Victor, not miles. That night, lying in their shared bed with the careful distance they'd maintained all week, Lydia spoke into the darkness. What was she like? Catherine? Victor was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, bright, like sunlight. She made everything feel lighter just by being in the room. People loved her instantly. That must have been wonderful. It was. Until she died and I realized I'd built my entire identity around being her husband. Without her, I didn't know who I was anymore. His voice was raw with old pain. That's why I was so lost. Not just grieving, completely untethered. And Eleanor? She has her mother's brightness, but also her own steel. You've seen it, the way she stood up to Margaret today. That's all Eleanor. She's extraordinary. Yes, which is why losing her to Adrian, he couldn't finish the sentence. Lydia rolled toward him in the darkness, close enough to see his profile outlined by moonlight. We're not going to lose her. I promise you that. You can't promise that. Watch me. She said it with such fierce certainty that Victor actually turned to look at her. Adrian has underestimated us from the beginning. He thought you were broken, thought I was weak, but we're neither of those things. And when this goes to court, we're going to prove it. Your confidence is either inspiring or delusional. Maybe both. She smiled in the darkness, but I'd rather be delusional and fighting than realistic and defeated. Victor's hand found hers between them on the mattress. Not the practiced intimacy they'd been rehearsing, but something more genuine. Thank you. For what? For not giving up on us. On this. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. I know this isn't what you wanted from life, being dragged into my mess, but you're handling it with more grace than I have any right to expect. Grace, is it? I thought I was handling it with stubborn determination and occasional recklessness. That too. And there, in the darkness, he almost laughed. Almost. They fell asleep like that, hands loosely joined, the distance between them finally feeling less like a chasm and more like a bridge they were both learning to cross. The next week brought a flurry of activity. Victor's solicitor, a sharp-eyed man named Mr. Carstairs, outlined their legal strategy with ruthless efficiency. They would need character witnesses, evidence of Eleanor's well-being, documentation of Victor's competent management of the estate, and most importantly, they needed to counter Adrian's narrative with one of their own. The key, Carstairs explained over breakfast, is demonstrating that your marriage, while unconventional, was the product of sound reasoning, not emotion, not manipulation, strategy. That shouldn't be difficult, Victor said dryly, since it's the truth. But the truth needs to be presented correctly. We'll need Lady Margaret's testimony about what she observed during her inspection, references from the household staff about Eleanor's care, and, he hesitated, we'll need you both to testify about the circumstances of your marriage, in detail. Lydia's stomach dropped. In court? Publicly? I'm afraid so. Adrian will certainly testify, painting your relationship in the worst possible light. You'll need to refute him directly. What kind of questions will they ask? Victor's voice was carefully neutral. Everything, how you met, why you proposed, whether there was any prior relationship, the exact timeline of events. Carstairs looked apologetic. It won't be pleasant, but it's necessary. After he left, Lydia and Victor sat in silence, contemplating the nightmare ahead. They're going to ask if we're actually married, Lydia said finally. In the physical sense. I know. What do we say? Victor rubbed his face tiredly. The truth? That we maintain separate sleeping arrangements within a shared bedroom. That this is a marriage of convenience that hasn't been consummated. That will support Adrian's argument that it's a sham. Lying under oath will destroy us if we're caught. So we're trapped either way. Lydia stood, pacing the room in frustration. Admit the marriage isn't physical and look like frauds. Lie about it and risk perjury. There is a third option. She turned to look at him. Which is? We make it real, fully, before the hearing. Victor wasn't looking at her, his voice carefully controlled. It's a legal marriage either way, but if it's consummated, we can answer those questions honestly. The suggestion hung in the air between them, shocking in its pragmatism. You're suggesting we sleep together to win a court case. I'm suggesting we remove one potential weapon from Adrian's arsenal, but only if... He finally met her eyes. Only if you're willing. I won't pressure you. This is already too much to ask. Lydia's mind was racing. The idea of physical intimacy with Victor was complicated. He wasn't unattractive, far from it. And there had been moments lately, hands touching, bodies close, when she'd felt something that definitely wasn't just strategic partnership, but crossing that line would change everything. Make this real in ways that couldn't be undone. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course. Take whatever time you need. But time was exactly what they didn't have. 2 days later, Eleanor fell ill. It started as a cough, easily dismissed as a common cold. But by evening, she was burning with fever, barely conscious, her breathing labored and wet. The doctor was summoned immediately. He examined her with grave efficiency, then drew Victor and Lydia aside. "It's pneumonia, advanced. She must have been fighting it for days without showing symptoms." "Can you treat it?" Victor's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'll do everything I can, Your Grace, but—" The doctor's expression was grim. "The next 24 hours will be critical. If the fever doesn't break—" He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Lydia felt the world tilt. Not Eleanor. They couldn't lose Eleanor, not now, not when they'd just started figuring out how to be a family. Victor had gone absolutely white. "Whatever you need, medicine, equipment, anything, just save her. I'll need to stay with her, monitor her constantly, and someone should be with her at all times, talking to her, keeping her grounded. Sometimes that can make the difference." "I'll do it," Lydia said immediately. "I'll stay with her." "So will I," Victor added. For the next 18 hours, they maintained vigil at Eleanor's bedside. The doctor administered treatments, cold compresses, bitter medicines, steaming inhalations. But mostly, they waited. Lydia read to Eleanor from her favorite books, even though the girl was too feverish to respond. Told her stories. Sang soft songs her own mother had sung to her as a child. Anything to keep Eleanor tethered to consciousness, to life. Victor held his daughter's hand, his usual control completely shattered. At one point, Lydia heard him whispering to Eleanor, apologies, promises, desperate pleas for her to keep fighting. "I can't lose you," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't lose anyone else. Please, sweetheart, please stay." Watching him fall apart was harder than Lydia expected. This was a man who'd held himself together through war, through his wife's death, through months of isolation. But the possibility of losing Eleanor was finally breaking him. Lydia moved to stand behind him, placing her hands on his shoulders. He leaned back into the touch, accepting comfort he'd never allowed himself before. "She's strong," Lydia said softly. "She'll fight this. What if she doesn't? What if I've been so focused on protecting her from Adrian that I missed the signs she was sick? What if—" "Stop. You couldn't have known. Children hide illness all the time." She squeezed his shoulders gently. "And she has everything she needs now. The doctor, medicine, both of us here. She's not alone." They stayed like that through the darkest hours of the night, taking turns reading and talking and just being present. At some point, exhausted, Victor fell asleep in the chair beside Eleanor's bed. Lydia covered him with a blanket, then returned to her own vigil. Dawn was breaking when Eleanor's fever finally broke. The doctor checked her vitals, his expression shifting from grim to cautiously optimistic. "She's through the worst of it. The fever's dropping, her breathing is easier." He looked at Lydia with something like respect. "Whatever you did, the constant attention, keeping her engaged, it helped. I'm certain of it." Lydia felt tears sliding down her face before she even realized she was crying. "She's going to be all right? She'll need rest and continued care. But yes, she's going to recover." The relief was so overwhelming Lydia had to sit down. Victor woke to the news and immediately went to Eleanor, pressing a kiss to her forehead with such tender care that Lydia had to look away. "Thank you," he said to the doctor. "And thank you," he added, turning to Lydia. "You saved her, stayed with her through everything." "We both did. Together." Later, after the doctor had left and Eleanor was sleeping peacefully, Victor found Lydia in the hallway outside the nursery. She was slumped against the wall, exhausted beyond measure. "You should rest," he said gently. "So should you." "I'm too wired to sleep, too—" He slid down the wall to sit beside her. Too grateful, too relieved, too everything. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Victor spoke again. "When I thought we might lose her, all I could think was that I'd wasted so much time, hiding from her, from you, from anything that might hurt me again. And for what? Catherine's still gone. The grief's still there. All I did was miss months of Eleanor growing up, miss the chance to actually know my own wife. You know me now. A bit, at least. Not enough. He turned to look at her, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. About what I suggested before, the consummation. You don't have to decide based on legal strategy. Then what should I base it on? What you want, what feels right. His hand found hers. I can't offer you the love story you probably dreamed of as a girl. Can't promise I'll ever be the husband you deserve. But I can promise to try, to be present, to let you in instead of keeping you at arm's length. Lydia studied their joined hands, calloused and scarred from his time in the military. Strong, warm, real. I didn't dream of love stories, she said quietly. I dreamed of stability, purpose, somewhere I belonged, and somehow, impossibly, I found all of that here. With you, with Eleanor. Even though I've been terrible at showing you that you belong? Even though, she smiled slightly, you're getting better. I'd like to keep getting better, if you'll let me. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was honest, genuine, the kind of promise Victor could actually keep. All right, Lydia said, let's try, really try, not just for the courts or for appearances, for us. Victor pulled her closer, his arm around her shoulders, and they sat together in the quiet morning light. Two people who'd married for all the wrong reasons, slowly discovering they might have found something right anyway. 3 days later, Eleanor was well enough to sit up and demand books. The household, which had been holding its breath, finally relaxed. And that evening, when Victor led Lydia to their bedroom, it was with an understanding that had nothing to do with legal strategy. Are you sure? He asked at the threshold. Are you? Terrified, actually. It's been a long time. And with you, it means something. That's frightening. Good, Lydia said, stepping into the room. If this were easy, it wouldn't matter. What happened between them that night was tender and awkward, and nothing like the dramatic romance novels Lydia had secretly read as a girl. Victor was careful to the point of hesitancy. Lydia was nervous enough to nearly bolt twice, but somewhere in the fumbling uncertainty, they found each other, found something real. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Victor's arm around her waist and her head on his shoulder, Lydia felt the last walls between them finally crumble. That was, Victor trailed off. Imperfect, Lydia finished, and real, and ours. Yes. He pressed a kiss to her hair. All of that. They fell asleep tangled together, no distance left between them at all. The court hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In that time, Lydia and Victor prepared with Carstairs, reviewing testimony and strategy. But more importantly, they simply lived, as a family, as partners, as husband and wife in every sense. The change didn't go unnoticed. Mrs. Brennan commented with grudging approval that his grace seems lighter somehow. Eleanor remarked that her father smiled more. Even the scandal sheets, still churning with speculation about the upcoming hearing, noted that the Duke and Duchess appeared unusually comfortable in each other's company at a recent social event. When the day of the hearing finally arrived, Lydia walked into the courtroom with Victor's hand firmly in hers. Adrian was already there, looking confident. His solicitor had a stack of documents that promised trouble. But Lydia wasn't afraid anymore. She'd faced down scandal, rebuilt a household, won over hostile staff, saved a child's life, and discovered something like love in the most unlikely place. Whatever Adrian threw at them, they'd face it together. The judge, an elderly man with sharp eyes, called the proceedings to order. We're here to address a petition filed by Mr. Adrian Ashbourne regarding the fitness of his cousin, the Duke of Ashbourne, to serve as guardian to Lady Eleanor Ashbourne and to hold his title. Mr. Ashbourne, you may begin. Adrian stood, all false concern and righteous purpose. Your Honor, I come before you out of deep worry for my family. My cousin, the Duke, has shown increasingly erratic behavior since his wife's death. The most troubling example being his hasty marriage to a woman of questionable character, a mere governess with whom scandal had already linked him. Objection. Carstairs was on his feet. Mr. Ashbourne is presenting speculation as fact. The Duchess's character is impeccable, and the marriage, while quick, was entirely legal and proper. Legal, perhaps, but proper. Marrying one's employee within weeks of scandal? That suggests compromised judgment at best, deliberate impropriety at worst. The judge looked interested. Mr. Ashbourne, do you have evidence of actual unfitness? Neglect of Lady Eleanor? Mismanagement of the estate? I have testimony from the Pemberton children about inappropriate meetings between the Duke and Miss Hartwell, as she was then, prior to their marriage. Meetings that suggest this was no innocent arrangement but a calculated seduction. We have statements from multiple witnesses refuting that timeline, Carstairs countered, including from Lady Margaret Thornwood, who conducted her own investigation and found no evidence of impropriety. Lady Margaret is biased. Lady Margaret is the late Duchess's own sister, Carstairs interrupted. If anyone had reason to oppose this marriage, it would be her. Yet she's prepared to testify in support of the Duke. That clearly rattled Adrian, but he pressed on, calling his witnesses. The Pemberton children gave their coached testimony about seeing Lydia meet a tall, dark man in the gardens. It was vague enough to be useless. They couldn't identify Victor specifically, couldn't provide dates or times that matched the actual timeline. When it was their turn, Carstairs called Lady Margaret first. She testified calmly about her inspection, about Eleanor's clear devotion to both her father and stepmother, about the household running with obvious efficiency. And in your professional opinion, Lady Margaret, you do serve on several charitable boards focused on child welfare. Is Lady Eleanor being properly cared for? Exceptionally so. Better than many children of privilege I've encountered. Margaret looked directly at Adrian. The Duke and Duchess have created a stable, loving home. Whatever one thinks of how their marriage came about, the result speaks for itself. Several household staff members testified next, all presenting a united front. Yes, the marriage had been sudden. No, they'd seen no evidence of manipulation or impropriety. Yes, the Duchess had proven herself capable and devoted. Then it was Victor's turn. He took the stand with visible tension but answered questions directly. About Catherine's death, about his grief, about meeting Lydia only after the scandal had already started. And why did you propose marriage, Your Grace? Because we both needed help. Miss Hartwell's reputation was destroyed through no fault of her own. I needed someone to help care for Eleanor. It was a practical solution to mutual problems. Not a romantic love match? No, but it was an honest partnership. And Victor glanced at Lydia. It's become something more than that. Something I didn't expect but am grateful for. Finally, Lydia was called. She stood before the judge, aware of every eye in the courtroom on her. Adrian's solicitor went for the throat immediately. Miss Hartwell, I beg your pardon, Duchess. Isn't it true that you were dismissed from the Pemberton household for improper conduct? I was dismissed because rumors linked me to the Duke, rumors I had no control over and which weren't true at the time they started. And yet you married the very man those rumors concerned. Quite convenient. Convenient isn't the word I'd use. Necessary, perhaps. The scandal destroyed my livelihood. The Duke offered a solution that protected us both. How mercenary. How practical. Lydia met his gaze steadily. I'm not going to pretend this was a fairy tale romance. It wasn't. It was two people making the best of terrible circumstances. But that doesn't make it wrong. It makes it real. The solicitor tried several more angles, implying she'd seduced Victor, questioning her qualifications to raise Eleanor, suggesting the whole marriage was a fraud. But Lydia had spent months learning to handle hostile questions. She didn't flinch. When asked directly about the physical nature of their marriage, she answered honestly. We are husband and wife in every sense. Whatever this began as, it's a real marriage now. The hearing lasted 4 hours. By the end, Lydia was exhausted, but she'd held her ground. They both had. The judge deliberated for only 20 minutes before returning. I've heard extensive testimony today about the Duke's fitness as guardian and his capacity to manage his responsibilities. While the circumstances of his recent marriage are certainly unconventional, I find no evidence that they stem from compromised judgment or unfitness. He looked at Adrian directly. Mr. Ashbourne, your concerns appear to be based more on disapproval of your cousin's choices than on actual evidence of harm. Lady Eleanor is clearly thriving, the estate is well managed, and the Duke and Duchess, whatever the origins of their union, present as a competent partnership. Adrian's face went red. Your Honor, if you would just consider, I've considered everything presented. My ruling is that the Duke of Ashbourne remains fit to serve as guardian to Lady Eleanor and to hold his title. This petition is denied. The gavel came down with a decisive crack. Lydia felt Victor's hand find hers under the table, gripping tight. Around them, supporters began to clap. Quiet at first, then louder. Lady Margaret was smiling. Even Mrs. Brennan, who'd come to observe, looked satisfied. Adrian stood frozen, his entire scheme collapsing around him. "This isn't over," he said as they filed out of the courtroom. "I'll find another way." "No, Adrian, it's over." Victor's voice was final. "Stay away from my family, all of them, or I'll make certain every door in London closes to you." It was the first time he'd called Lydia family. The first time he'd claimed her as something beyond a convenient arrangement. Adrian left without another word, defeated and furious. Outside the courthouse, Lydia turned to Victor. "We won. You won. Your testimony, your composure, that's what convinced him." "We won," she repeated firmly. "Together." And there, in front of witnesses and society and anyone who cared to watch, Victor pulled her close and kissed her. Not for show, not for strategy, but because he wanted to. When they finally broke apart, Lydia was smiling. "That was very public, Your Grace." "Good. Let them talk." He kept his arm around her waist as they walked toward their carriage. "I'm done hiding what matters." The carriage ride back to Ashbourne House felt different, lighter. Victor kept Lydia's hand in his the entire way, occasionally glancing at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Or maybe seeing her clearly for the first time. "Eleanor's going to be furious she missed the drama," Lydia said, breaking the comfortable silence. "She'll demand a full reenactment. With costumes." Victor's smile was genuine, unguarded, though I suspect Mrs. Shaw already has the entire story from the staff who attended. Mrs. Brennan was there, in the back row. "Did you see her?" "I did. She was actually smiling when the judge ruled in our favor." Miracles do happen, apparently. They arrived home to find the household in a state of barely controlled celebration. News had traveled fast, likely via the network of servants who seemed to know everything before their employers did. Eleanor was waiting in the entrance hall, still pale from her recent illness, but vibrant with excitement. "Did we win? Mrs. Shaw said we won, but she wouldn't tell me details until you got home, and I've been waiting forever." Victor scooped her up despite her protests that she was too old for such treatment. "We won. Uncle Adrian's petition was denied. You're stuck with us." "Good. I didn't want to live with him anyway. He smells like old tobacco and broken dreams." "Eleanor," Lydia tried to sound stern, but failed completely. "Where did you hear that phrase?" "One of the stable boys said it about Lord Pemberton last week. I thought it was poetic." Eleanor wrapped her arms around Victor's neck. "I'm glad you won, Father. I was worried." "So were we, sweetheart. But it's over now." He set her down gently. "Why don't you go help Mrs. Shaw with the celebration dinner? I believe she's making your favorite dessert." After Eleanor bounded off toward the kitchens, Victor turned to find half the household staff gathered in various doorways, watching. Mr. Collins stepped forward first. "Congratulations, Your Grace. Both of you. The entire household is pleased with the outcome." "Thank you, Collins. And thank you all for your testimony and support." Victor's gaze swept the assembled staff. "I know this hasn't been an easy transition, but you've handled it with grace and loyalty. I won't forget that." Mrs. Brennan cleared her throat. "If I may, Your Grace, I believe I owe the Duchess an apology. I was unfair in my initial judgment. You've proven yourself more than capable, and Lady Eleanor clearly adores you. I should have recognized that sooner." The admission clearly cost her pride, but it was genuine. Lydia felt a rush of unexpected gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Brennan. That means more than you know." "Yes, well." The housekeeper's usual severity returned, but with less edge. "We should prepare for dinner. I assume you'll want to celebrate properly?" "Actually," Lydia said, an idea forming, "I'd like the staff to join us. All of you. Tonight is a victory for the entire household, not just the family." Victor raised an eyebrow, but didn't object. "The Duchess is right. Set places for everyone in the main dining room. We'll celebrate together." The staff looked shocked, then pleased. Boundaries were being crossed, the proper division between employer and employee deliberately blurred. But somehow it felt right. They'd all fought for this in their own ways. Dinner was chaotic and wonderful. Eleanor insisted on sitting between Lydia and Victor, narrating her own version of events with dramatic flair. Mrs. Shaw's cooking was exceptional. Even the youngest scullery maid was included, shy but beaming at the head table. At one point, Mr. Collins stood and raised his glass. To the Duke and Duchess, may their partnership continue to confound expectations and prove that unconventional choices can lead to extraordinary outcomes. Hear, hear. The response echoed through the room. Later, after the staff had returned to their duties, and Eleanor had been tucked into bed, with both Victor and Lydia reading her a story together, they found themselves alone in their bedroom. "I can't believe it's actually over," Lydia said, unpinning her hair at the vanity. "Weeks of stress, and it ended in one afternoon." "It's not entirely over. Adrian will sulk and scheme. Society will keep gossiping, will still face challenges." Victor loosened his cravat, watching her in the mirror. "But the worst of it, the threat of losing everything, that's done. Thanks to you. That testimony you gave about grief and partnership, it was perfect. Thanks to us. You were the one who insisted we fight instead of hide." He moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "I would have retreated, accepted defeat rather than risk public humiliation. You wouldn't let me." Lydia met his eyes in the mirror. "Someone once told me that fear is useless, that being prepared is what matters." Sounds like a wise person. Incredibly wise, also incredibly stubborn and emotionally unavailable, but he's getting better. Victor's lips quirked. "Is he?" "Significantly. Just this morning, he actually smiled at breakfast without being prompted. Revolutionary progress." "Well, he has good motivation. His wife is terrifying when she's determined, and rather beautiful when she's fighting for what matters." His hands moved from her shoulders to gently turn her around. "I never thanked you properly. For everything you've done. For staying. For caring about Eleanor when you had no obligation to. For believing we could win when I'd already given up. You don't need to thank me. This is my life too now. My family." "Is it? Really?" The question was vulnerable, uncertain. "I know I brought you into this under terrible circumstances, gave you no real choice, and I've been difficult, distant, not the husband you deserved." Lydia stood, closing the space between them. "Victor, I need you to understand something. I didn't have a better life waiting for me. No grand prospects, no passionate romance on the horizon. What I had was survival, scraping by as a governess, invisible and disposable. You offered me something more. Not love, initially, but purpose, position, the chance to matter. And now? Now I have all of that and something I didn't expect. A partner who challenges me. A child I've come to love. A home that finally feels like mine." She touched his face gently. "You weren't what I dreamed of as a girl, but maybe you're what I needed as a woman." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and there was nothing strategic about it. This was desire and affection, and the beginning of something that might actually be love. When they finally broke apart, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling for you. I thought you should know. It's inconvenient and terrifying and not at all what I planned, but it's happening anyway." "Good, because I'm falling too, and I'd hate to do it alone." They made love that night with a tenderness that was entirely new. Not the nervous fumbling of their first time, but something deeper, a claiming and a surrender, both at once. Afterward, wrapped in each other, Victor spoke into the darkness. "Tell me about your mother. You've never really talked about her." Lydia was quiet for a moment, organizing memories she usually kept locked away. "She was a seamstress, clever with her hands. She died when I was 12, fever that the doctor couldn't cure because we couldn't afford the good medicine. My father had already died 2 years before that, accident at the factory." "So you were alone at 12. "The parish took me in, trained me to be a governess. It was that or the workhouse. The old bitterness had faded, leaving only fact. I learned quickly that being useful kept you fed, being invisible kept you safe, and complaining about unfairness got you nowhere, until you married me and had to become very visible and very vocal very quickly. Yes, terrifying, honestly, but also, Liberating? For the first time, my voice mattered. My choices had weight. She turned to face him. What about you? What was Catherine like beyond the brightness you mentioned? Victor was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she was easy to love. That was her gift. Everything felt effortless with her, but it also meant I never had to work at it, never had to dig deep or examine what I actually felt because she made it all so smooth. And with me? With you, nothing is smooth. Everything requires effort and honesty and constant negotiation. He pulled her closer. And I'm realizing that's better, more real. With Catherine, I was performing the role of devoted husband. With you, I'm actually learning to be one. That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said to me. I'm working on it. Give me time. I have time. Years of it, hopefully. Hopefully decades. His voice was drowsy now, sleep pulling him under. Decades of you challenging me and terrifying society and making our household run with ruthless efficiency. Lydia smiled into the darkness. That sounds perfect. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Lord Pemberton arrived at Ashbourne House looking deeply uncomfortable, his hat literally in his hands. Your Grace, he said when Lydia received him in the morning room, I won't take much of your time. I came to apologize. For my children's testimony. I knew Adrian had approached them, but I didn't realize he'd coached them so thoroughly. When I learned what they'd said in court, he shook his head. It was false, all of it. Caroline and Margaret never saw you with the Duke before the scandal. They made it up because Adrian convinced them it was helping. Why are you telling me this now? The hearing is over. Because it's the right thing to do, and because Pemberton looked genuinely ashamed. Because I dismissed you when you needed support. I chose my family's reputation over your well-being. That was cowardly. Lydia studied the man who'd once employed her, who'd abandoned her the moment she became inconvenient. She could reject this apology, could make him suffer the way she'd suffered. But what would that accomplish? I accept your apology, Lord Pemberton, and I hope your daughters learn that lying, even for what seems like a good reason, has consequences. They're being appropriately disciplined, and they insisted I bring you this. He handed her a letter, sealed with childish wax. From Caroline. She wanted to explain herself. After Pemberton left, Lydia opened the letter. Caroline's handwriting was still developing, the letters uneven but earnest. Dear Duchess Lydia, I'm sorry I lied about seeing you with the Duke. Mr. Adrian said it would help Father and that you wouldn't mind because you were already married. I didn't understand it would hurt you. Mother says I was foolish and that I should have known better. I miss you teaching us. The new governess is boring and doesn't make learning fun. But I understand if you never want to see me again. I hope Lady Eleanor knows how lucky she is to have you. Yours truly, Caroline Pemberton. Lydia folded the letter carefully, surprised by the sting of tears. Caroline was just a child, manipulated by an adult with an agenda. Holding a grudge against her would be pointless. She found Victor in his study, reviewing estate accounts. He looked up when she entered, automatically smiling at her presence, another small change she treasured. Pemberton came to apologize, she said, settling into the chair across from him, and to admit his daughters were coached. Generous of him, after the hearing is decided. Still, it's something. And I think I want to write to Caroline. Let her know I'm not angry. You're kinder than I am. I want to throttle Adrian for using children to wage his petty war. Adrian's gone. Let him fade into obscurity where he belongs. Lydia leaned back, studying Victor. What are you really working on? Those don't look like normal accounts. They're not. I'm establishing a trust for Eleanor. And, he hesitated, and I'm setting up a fund for girls who lose their positions through no fault of their own. A way to help them transition to new employment or training without falling into destitution. Lydia felt her throat tighten. Victor, don't. I know what you're thinking, that it's guilt or sentimentality. But it's practical. There are hundreds of women in situations like yours was, caught in circumstances beyond their control, punished for existing in proximity to scandal. If I can help prevent even a few from suffering what you went through, it's worth doing. It's more than worth doing. It's extraordinary. It's the bare minimum, though I'm open to your input on how to structure it. You understand the reality of that situation better than anyone. They spent the next hour planning, Victor surprising her with his genuine interest in making this fund meaningful rather than symbolic. He listened when she explained the specific challenges governesses faced, the lack of options available, the crushing shame of dismissal. We could partner with employment agencies, Lydia suggested. Provide references for women whose previous employers won't. Maybe even fund training in new skills. I like that. Make it proactive rather than just rescue. Victor was making notes, his strategic mind fully engaged. What about housing, short-term lodging, while they search for new positions? That would be revolutionary. Most dismissed staff end up in terrible boarding houses or worse. They were so absorbed in planning that they didn't notice Eleanor until she spoke from the doorway. Are you working on something important? Very important, Victor said, gesturing for her to join them. We're creating a fund to help women who lose their jobs unfairly, like what happened to Lydia. Eleanor climbed into Lydia's lap, studying the papers spread across the desk. So other ladies won't have to go through what she did? Exactly. That's good. What Lydia went through was terrible. Eleanor looked up at Lydia seriously. I'm glad something terrible brought you to us, but I wish it didn't have to be terrible. Me too, sweetheart. But sometimes good things come from difficult circumstances. We just have to be brave enough to see the possibilities. Like how Father was sad about Mother dying, but then you came and made him less sad. The observation was delivered with such childlike directness that both adults froze. Victor recovered first. Yes, though I'll always miss your mother, Eleanor. That doesn't change. I know, but it's okay to be happy again, too. Mother would want that. She always wanted everyone to be happy. It was such mature wisdom from someone so young. Lydia held her tighter. Your mother was very wise, and so are you. I'm going to be a duchess someday too, Eleanor announced. When I'm grown, and I'm going to help people like you and Father are doing, because that's what duchesses should do, not just go to parties and wear pretty dresses. You'll be an excellent duchess, Victor said, his voice rough with emotion. The best kind. The following weeks brought a shift in how society treated them. The court victory had legitimized their marriage in a way even the initial ceremony hadn't. Invitations began arriving again, not the grudging, curiosity-driven ones from before, but genuine requests for their presence. Lady Margaret proved to be an unexpected ally, using her influence to rehabilitate Lydia's reputation. She hosted a dinner party specifically to introduce my dear sister-in-law to her circle, effectively declaring Lydia worthy of acceptance. You saved Eleanor, Margaret said quietly during that dinner, pulling Lydia aside. And you gave Victor something to fight for besides his grief. I was wrong to judge you so harshly. You were grieving too. I understand that better now. Still, I should have seen what was right in front of me, that you were good for them, good for this family. Margaret squeezed her hand. Catherine would have liked you, I think. She always admired people who fought for what they believed in. I wish I could have known her. In a way, you do. You see her in Eleanor every day. The brightness, the determination. That's Catherine's legacy. You're just helping it flourish. The conversation stayed with Lydia long after the party ended. She'd spent so long seeing Catherine as a ghost she could never measure up to. But maybe that was the wrong way to think about it. Maybe honoring Catherine meant loving the daughter she'd left behind and supporting the husband she'd cherished. Not competing with a memory, but building on a foundation. That night, lying in bed with Victor reading beside her, a comfortable domestic routine they'd developed, Lydia spoke her thoughts aloud. I think I understand now why you couldn't let yourself love anyone after Catherine. It wasn't just grief. It was guilt. Like loving again would be betraying her memory. Victor set down his book. How did you know? Because I spent months feeling guilty for being happy here. Like I didn't deserve it because of how I arrived. But happiness isn't something we have to earn through suffering. It's something we're allowed to accept when it comes. When did you get so wise? When I married someone who forced me to examine my entire life philosophy. She rolled to face him. We could spend the rest of our lives feeling guilty for finding something good in terrible circumstances. Or we could just be grateful, live our lives, love each other without caveat. The second option sounds better. Then let's do that. Victor pulled her close, his book forgotten. I love you. I should have said that before. I love you, Lydia. Not as a replacement or a second choice or a convenient solution, but as yourself, for exactly who you are. I love you too. Even though you're stubborn and emotionally constipated and terrible at showing affection in public. I showed affection outside the courthouse. That was very public. 1 kiss in 2 months of marriage. Truly, you're a romantic visionary. I'll work on it. But he was laughing as he kissed her, and Lydia decided that imperfect love honestly expressed was better than perfect love performed. The turning point, the moment Lydia knew they'd truly won, came at the spring charity ball 3 months later. It was the first major social event of the season, attended by everyone who mattered in London society. The Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne arrived together, Eleanor between them in her first real ball gown. I'm nervous, Eleanor whispered as they entered. Everyone's staring. Let them stare, Lydia said. We have nothing to hide. And they didn't. They moved through the crowd with heads high, greeting acquaintances, dancing together, presenting as exactly what they were, a family that had fought for the right to exist. When Victor led Lydia onto the dance floor for the evening's first waltz, the whispers started again, but this time Lydia heard a different tone. They look happy. Lady Eleanor seems delightful. Perhaps we were too harsh in our initial judgment. I heard the Duchess established an employment fund for dismissed staff. How progressive. The narrative was shifting, not completely. There would always be those who disapproved or whispered about her origins. But the balance had tipped. She was no longer the scandalous governess who'd trapped a duke. She was the Duchess of Ashbourne. Full stop. Halfway through the waltz, Victor pulled her closer than was strictly proper. You're smiling. I'm happy. Is that allowed? I insist on it. He guided her through a turn. Though I should warn you, Lady Westbrook is approaching with what looks like a marriage-minded daughter. Prepare for matchmaking attempts with every eligible bachelor in attendance. Why would she? Oh, for Eleanor. Apparently 7 is not too young to start planning strategic alliances. Victor's tone was dry. The joys of being a duke with an eligible daughter. She's 7. Tell Lady Westbrook to come back in 10 years. I intend to, though I appreciate that Eleanor's legitimacy is no longer in question. That's something. That's everything. The evening continued with more dancing, more conversations, more small victories as people who'd once cut them directly now greeted them warmly. Adrian was conspicuously absent. Rumor had it he'd left London entirely, unable to bear the social shame of his failed petition. Near midnight, Lydia stepped out onto the terrace for air. The ballroom had grown stifling with heat and perfume and the press of bodies. She was surprised when Lady Margaret joined her. Overwhelming, isn't it? A bit. I'm still adjusting to being the center of attention rather than invisible in the corner. You're handling it beautifully. Catherine used to escape to terraces too. She found these events exhausting. Margaret leaned against the balustrade, looking out over the gardens. I wanted to thank you for something. What? For making it easier to let her go. I've been holding on to my grief like a shield, using it to justify my anger at Victor for moving forward. But watching you with Eleanor, seeing how you honor Catherine's memory without being crushed by it, it's helped me see that moving forward isn't betrayal. Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. That means more than you know. You've given my sister's family a future, given Eleanor a mother who sees her as more than just Catherine's legacy. That's a gift. Margaret turned to face her. I know I was horrible to you at first. I hope you can forgive that. Already forgiven. We were all fighting our own battles. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the party through the terrace windows. Inside, Victor was dancing with Eleanor, her small feet on top of his as he waltzed her around the floor. The sight made Lydia's heart clench. He's different with you, Margaret observed. More present. Catherine loved him, but she sometimes said he kept part of himself locked away. You seem to have found the key. Or picked the lock. I'm not always graceful about it. Good. Grace is overrated. Persistence is what matters. When they returned inside, Lydia found Victor waiting for her with Eleanor yawning against his shoulder. Someone is past her bedtime, he said. I'm not tired, Eleanor protested, even as her eyes drooped. I want to dance more. Tomorrow. Tonight, we're going home. Victor looked at Lydia. Ready? More than ready. The carriage ride home was quiet, Eleanor asleep between them. Lydia watched the city pass by and marveled at how different this felt from that first terrifying ride to Ashbourne House months ago. Then she'd been scared and alone, entering a prison of her own making. Now she was going home, to a life she'd built, to a family she loved. What are you thinking? Victor asked softly, careful not to wake Eleanor. That I'm glad for all of it. The scandal, the fear, the fighting, because it brought me here. To a carriage at midnight with a sleeping child and a husband who still doesn't always know the right thing to say? To exactly this, which is perfect in its imperfection. Victor's hand found hers in the darkness. I never thought I'd be happy again after Catherine died. Didn't think I deserved it. But you've taught me that happiness isn't something we earn or deserve. It's something we build. Together. Look at you being emotionally articulate. I'm so proud. Don't get used to it. I'll probably revert to grunting and avoiding feelings by tomorrow. I'll take what I can get. They arrived home to find the household waiting, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Mrs. Brennan took Eleanor from Victor's arms with gentle efficiency. Mrs. Shaw had hot tea waiting in the drawing room. Mr. Collins helped with their coats like they were treasured rather than merely employed. Thank you, Lydia said to the assembled staff, for everything, tonight and always. It's our pleasure, Your Grace, Mrs. Brennan said, and meant it. Welcome home. Later, in their bedroom, Victor helped Lydia with the complicated fastenings of her ball gown, a task he'd gotten surprisingly good at over the past months. I've been thinking, he said as he worked, about the future, our future. Should I be worried? Probably. I'm considering taking a more active role in Parliament. There are reforms needed, labor laws, child welfare, women's rights, things I never paid attention to before but now seem crucial. Because of the employment fund? Because of you. Because you've shown me what happens when systems fail the people they're supposed to protect. He finished with the gown, his hand settling on her waist. I want to use this position for something beyond maintaining estates and attending parties. I want to actually make a difference. Lydia turned to face him, seeing the determination in his eyes. Then do it. I'll help however I can. You already help, just by existing, by challenging me to be better. That's my favorite activity. Right after arguing with you and occasionally allowing you to win debates. Occasionally, I've won exactly one argument in 3 months. And you should treasure that victory. It won't happen often. They fell into bed laughing, tangled together in a way that had become natural. Comfortable. Home. As sleep pulled her under, Lydia thought about the girl she'd been. Scared, alone, desperate for survival. That girl would never have believed this future was possible, would never have imagined finding love and purpose in such unlikely circumstances. But life didn't work according to plans or expectations. It worked according to choices. And every choice she'd made, accepting Victor's proposal, fighting for Eleanor, refusing to be invisible, had led her here. To a man who challenged her, a daughter who needed her, a household that respected her. A life that was messy and complicated and nothing like what she dreamed of as a child. It was better. 6 months later, Lydia stood in the House of Lords gallery, watching Victor deliver a speech about employment protections for domestic workers. His voice was steady, confident, as he argued for reforms that would prevent women from being dismissed without cause or references. Beside her, Eleanor sat quietly, her young face serious as she listened to her father speak about fairness and justice and the responsibility of those with power to protect those without. That's because of you, Eleanor whispered. Father caring about this. It's because of both of us, and because he chose to see what needed changing. When Victor finished his speech to polite applause, not enthusiastic but respectful, he looked up to find them in the gallery. His smile was small but genuine. For us, he mouthed. For all of us, Lydia thought. That evening, their household gathered for dinner, as had become custom on important occasions. The dining room was full, family and staff together, boundaries blurred into something resembling community. Mrs. Brennan had outdone herself with the meal. Mrs. Shaw beamed as each course was praised. Even the scullery maid sat at table, shy but happy to be included. "To the Duke," Mr. Collins said, raising his glass, "for using his position to fight for those who can't fight for themselves." "To the Duchess," Mrs. Shaw added, "for teaching us all that strength comes in unexpected packages." "To Eleanor," Lydia said, "for being brave enough to defend her family when it mattered most." "To family," Eleanor finished. "However we build it." The toast echoed around the table, and Lydia felt the truth of it settle in her bones. This was family, not perfect, not conventional, but real and chosen and fought for. After dinner, Victor found her in the library, where she'd retreated to read. He settled beside her on the sofa, pulling her against his side with easy familiarity. "Your speech was excellent," Lydia said. "It'll take years to pass, if it passes at all. But you'll keep fighting." "We'll keep fighting." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I've learned that the right battles are worth the long fight." "When did you get so optimistic?" "When I married a woman stubborn enough to believe we could win impossible victories." Lydia set aside her book, turning to face him fully. "I love you. I know I say it often, but I need you to understand how much. You saved my life, Victor, not just by marrying me, but by letting me save yours too. We saved each other. That's how the best partnerships work." They sat together in the quiet library, the fire crackling, the house settling around them. Outside, London continued its endless churning, scandals rising and falling, reputations made and destroyed, the great wheel of society turning without pause. But here, in this room, in this moment, Lydia felt nothing but peace. She'd started as a governess with no prospects and a scandal she didn't earn. She'd become a duchess through desperation and strategy. And somewhere along the way, she'd found something no one could have predicted: purpose, partnership, love. Not the fairy tale kind, messy and hard-won, built on honesty rather than romance, but real, lasting, worth every battle they'd fought to claim it. "What are you thinking about?" Victor asked, his hand tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. "That I wouldn't change anything, even the terrible parts, because they led me here. To a library on a Tuesday evening with a husband who still doesn't always say the right thing? To exactly this, which is everything." Victor pulled her closer, and Lydia let herself sink into the embrace, into the life they'd built together against all odds, into the future they were still creating, one imperfect choice at a time. Outside the window, snow began to fall, the first of the season. It covered the gardens in white, transforming everything into something new and clean. A fresh start. Another beginning. And inside Ashbourne House, a family sat together by the fire, born of scandal, forged in crisis, made real by courage and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Not a governess who'd trapped a duke, not a duke who'd married beneath him, but two people who'd walked into the harshest world and reshaped it with intelligence, determination, and quiet strength. Their story had started with survival. It would continue with love. And that, Lydia thought as Victor's arms tightened around her, was the most extraordinary victory of all.